This is Commission President Tom Albro reconvening the regular meeting of September 24th, 2013. The time is 1:05. We are meeting in the Conference Center at Sea-Tac Airport. Present with me today are Commissioners Bowman, Bryant, Creighton, and Gregoire. This meeting is being digitally recorded and may be viewed or heard at any time on our website and may be rebroadcast by King County Television. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So today we have no special orders of business. So, Commissioners, we will move right on to the consent calendar. All items on the consent calendar are considered routine and will be adopted by one motion. If a commissioner or a member of the public requests discussion of a particular item, that item will be removed from the consent calendar and considered separately. I have heard and know of no such requests, so I would entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
It has been moved and seconded. There's no discussion. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. As was noticed on today's agenda, the Commission will now accept public testimony on any item on our agenda or on other matters. If you wish to speak, you need to sign in with our Commission records staff and identify the specific item you are addressing. Comment time today will be limited to 3 minutes. Because we have a briefing of particular importance to us on the proposed Sodo Arena environmental impact statement, we will allow those who wish to offer testimony to either speak before that briefing or immediately after it, before the Commission has its own discussion about it. So I know of 2 individuals who've signed up to speak before, but if you would like to speak before, make sure that Katie knows. So, with that, let's just get into it. First up for public comment is John Lockwood.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Port Commission. I'm John Lockwood, representing Vigor Industrial on Harbor Island, and I appreciate the opportunity to make some comments before you at today's meeting. With 10,620 jobs, Washington State is the number 10 contributor of labor compensation, jobs, and value added to this country's shipbuilding and ship repair industry. In Seattle alone, more than 2,120 skilled tradesmen and women work at Vigor, Queejack, Foss, Pacific Fishermen, Lake Union Dry Dock, and other shipyards and boatyards. They make an average annual wage of $73,630, and that is 45% higher than the national average for the private sector economy. I cite these statistics to demonstrate that these industrial jobs matter. They represent a valuable and irreplaceable slice of our shrinking middle class. Skilled industrial positions provide family wage jobs without prerequisite 4-year degrees. They put people to work producing real, tangible, and valuable goods. Further, the continued growth of the maritime industrial base in Seattle, I think, is key to helping the port achieve the strategic objectives of your century agenda. And as in every successful public-private partnership, our industry needs the port's strong support with the city, the county, and the state to maintain the industrial areas and industrial enclaves in which our employees work and produce every day. At Vigor Industrial, we're moving ahead smartly. We're consolidating, modernizing, and updating to become more competitive and to employ more people. We're pursuing emerging maritime markets like oil and gas support in the Arctic and liquid natural gas, or LNG. Our new training center on Harbor Island is turning out young, skilled, and certified welders to refresh the industry. We remain committed to reinvigorating the marine industrial base in Seattle and Puget Sound because these industrial jobs matter. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mike Elliott.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Mike Elliott. I'm the spokesman for the Washington State Legislative Board, Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. I'm also representing the United Transportation Smart Trade Crafts here today. We have long been opposed to gentrification in the SoDo area. We're opposed to third arena development in the area. We don't feel like there's been adequate studies and planning. The safety of our membership and the general public in terms of commuter traffic, freight traffic, and passenger rail are our primary objectives and of our boards, and we would ask that a very, very careful look and study be taken into this third arena proposal, and that our position be noted as in opposition to the third arena. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any additional individuals who would like to testify before the briefing? None? All right. Well, then, Tay, I think we'll kick it over to you and get to the briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as you indicated, we're going to put the briefing before the action items. So, 7A, this is an update on the proposed SoDo Sports Arena Environmental Impact Statement. We have several people that will be presenters, including Mike Merritt, Tracy Goodwin, Jerry Poor, and Randy Cerf from JRC Consulting.
Thank you, Commissioners and Mr. Yoshitani. We're here today to present a briefing on the status of the proposed Seattle Sports Arena located in the SoDo area and the environmental and economic reviews on that project prepared for the City of Seattle. As you recall, the arena proposal was announced by developer Chris Hansen, Mayor Mike McGinn, and County Executive Dow Constantine on February 16th of 2012. Acting on the recommendations of an advisory panel and following a series of negotiations, the city and county approved preliminary agreements to go forward with the project in October 2012. The project is a 20,000-seat arena and sports facility of about 750,000 square feet located on First Avenue South at Holgate Street within the Duwamish Manufacturing Industrial Center and the Stadium Transition Overlay District. The proposed action also includes the acquisition of a portion of Occidental Avenue South between South Holgate Street and South Massachusetts Street called a street vacation. Parking is proposed to be provided by off-site commercial parking lots. The project would be financed by a combination of private investment and contributions from Seattle and King County tax revenues generated by the project up to $200 million. Before public funds can flow to this project, the developer must secure permits and the street vacation and an NBA team with a non-relocation agreement. The NBA has turned down a bid by Mr. Hansen's ownership group for the Sacramento Kings, and there's no immediate prospect for securing a team. As you'll hear and as you recall, the port and maritime stakeholders have raised concern about the project from the outset. We believe the arena development will increase development pressures in the heart of the Duwamish industrial area, affecting port operations and harming the long-term economic viability and growth of family wage jobs in the area. Further, we don't believe alternative sites were adequately reviewed, and the transportation mitigation has not been identified or funded. So for the briefing today, first you'll hear from Tracy Goodwin of the port's legal staff about the legal background of the environmental review process. She'll be followed by Jerry Poor, Manager of Regional Transportation, who will provide an overview of the EIS, our analysis and conclusions as we've developed them so far. And lastly, you'll hear comments on the economic analysis from Randy Cerf, who has an expert background in economics policy consulting and as a CFO for several companies. I'll turn the presentation over now to Tracy.
Just one question. So, Mike, I know that we had submitted a request to the city to extend the EIS comment period. Have we heard back from them?
That's right. It was declined. They initially allocated a 45-day comment period, which is somewhat longer than typical. 30 days may be considered typical. Tracing addresses further, but the response was that since they granted or allowed 45 days initially, that was sufficient time.
Okay, and so the end of the comment period is September 30th, and it
That's right.
remains as it is.
That's right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, Commissioners and Mr. Yoshitani. Can you hear me now? Oh, yes.
Much better.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and Mr. Yoshitani. The State Environmental Policy Act, or SEPA, is the state's most fundamental expression of environmental policy. It's intended to drive agencies to informed decision-making, and its provisions are intended to have agencies consider the likely adverse environmental impacts of proposals, consider appropriate mitigation for proposals, or deny the proposal. In this situation, the City of Seattle has chosen to be what's called the lead agency for preparing the environmental impact statement for the proposed arena. As the lead agency, the City of Seattle is responsible for carrying out SEPA's procedural requirements. And as Mike told you, the draft environmental impact statement has already been issued. The city issued it in mid-August. The comment period is underway, and the deadline is September 30th. The port did ask for an additional 15 days, but the city, as I understood their response, said that they had already provided an additional 15 days and felt that 45 days was sufficient. The port team is currently preparing detailed comments on the draft environmental impact statement. The purpose of these comments is to provide the city with feedback about its analysis. The city will take the comments, prepare responses to the comments, and issue a final environmental impact statement after the first of the year. They'll also, along with the EIS, final EIS, they would also be expected to issue a master use permit that may or may not contain conditions based on the environmental review. Now, the port has asked the city last year to prepare what's called a programmatic EIS. And the purpose of a programmatic EIS is to provide a higher level look at the possible alternatives to locating the proposed arena in the SoDo area. The city decided not to do this and has gone ahead and prepared what's called a project level EIS. And a project level EIS looks in more details at the specific impacts of locating the arena.
And just on that point, with regard to Safeco Field and Seahawks Stadium, the city did go ahead and do a programmatic EIS on both of them? Or?
It's my understanding they did for both of those facilities before they cited them in the SoDo area.
I'm curious, did in their declining, or perhaps they just didn't respond to the request, but what was the justification, or do we know the justification for not doing a programmatic EIS in this case?
I'm not sure that I've heard a justification or am aware of what that justification might be.
Okay.
On that related point, though, for this EIS, the city has decided to treat the project as a private project. Now, under SEPA, there's different responsibilities for agencies depending on whether your project is private or public. Under the SEPA rules, private projects, agencies are required to consider what's called the no action alternative, and then what's considered reasonable alternatives. In this instance, the city has looked at siting the arena in SoDo or perhaps expanding Key Arena and Memorial Stadium. Because they've considered it to be a private proposal, they haven't looked at any sites outside the city of Seattle. Had the city considered the project to be a public proposal, we could have anticipated that they would have looked at more alternative sites, perhaps not as many as they would have for a programmatic EIS, but it would have been reasonable to anticipate that they would look at perhaps other sites in King County. The SEPA rules also provide that when a project has both public and private components, and those components are considered to be intertwined, an agency is required to treat the project as a public project. But the city didn't do that either.
So Commissioner Bowman.
Right. Tracy, just so I'm clear about this point, so Mike, you did say that the city and the county collectively would be contributing about $200 million in tax revenue? So how is this considered a private project if there's public money? And I'm not trying to put you on the hot spot.
No,
I'm
I
just
think
making sure I'm following this.
I think that's a really good question, and I'm not sure how the city came to consider this to be a private project, because I would think both the SEPA rules and the facts in this circumstance would mean that it would be a public project, or at the very least, a project with both public and private components that were intertwined, meaning it should have been treated as a public project.
Okay, thank you.
And just to follow up on that, if I remember the terms correctly, the land is going to be owned by the city, is that right?
Yes,
So this is a project on public land with public money.
that's
But
the
it's
way
a
I
private project?
understand it. Yes. Yes, Commissioner, that's the way I understand the MOU.
Well, okay, but, so I get all of that, and that sounds kind of strange. But were you saying earlier that the standard for a private project, considering the project as a private project, is a lower standard than if it were considered a public project?
I'm not sure if I would say lower, but it's different. And the reason is...
Maybe more demanding or less demanding, more exhaustive, less exhaustive? How would you describe
I think demanding is a good term to use. I think that SEPA has required that public projects have a more demanding and more extensive level of analysis of alternatives than they do for private projects. And part of that is they recognize that private proponents are perhaps reasonably looking at one site, where a public proponent would have more flexibility and more variety of sites.
So did they respond? Do we know their justification for choosing to treat it as a private project? Because we did make this point to them, not this specific point, I guess, but do we know their justification?
No, I don't know their justification, and we have looked at the EIS very carefully and the MOU that preceded it, and it's not a decision that I understand based on the facts of the draft EIS or the MOU.
I just want to take that back again. This was at least addressed in the scoping time before the draft EIS was written by the city, correct?
Yes, the port pointed out that it was a public project during the scoping
And yet,
period.
in the draft EIS, we do not see them justifying why they're treating it as a private project, or, put it squarely, addressing the issues that were raised in the scoping project.
On that
Period.
point, that's correct. What they say in the EIS is that the proponent is a private person or a private entity, ArenaCo, a corporation. So that's their rationale for treating it as a private project. I also understand the Commission has had questions about whether SEPA requires consideration of economic or socioeconomic impacts of a proposal. Now, the SEPA rules specifically do not require an agency to look at the economic or the socioeconomic impacts of a proposal. The city has looked at those impacts in this EIS, and I think you'll hear more from our staff about their opinion about how those have been addressed.
So does SEPA speak to this as being optional? Is that basically how the law is constructed?
It is optional, yes.
Okay, so whoever is doing it, in this case, the city as the lead agency, can decide whether or not to look at the economic impacts. And I suppose since it's optional, then they can kind of set the bar wherever they want? Is that how it goes? Or is there a threshold, once you start, you've got to actually do it?
Well, SEPA requires that environmental impact statements be considered what's called adequate, and they're governed by the rule of reason, which are pretty general terms, but courts look to whether agencies have overall done an adequate job and whether a reasonable person would think that an adequate job has been done. They do not overturn EISs for just minor problems, but they will do that if they see have an overall feeling that it's not been a good job has not been accomplished. Now, with respect to your question about economic impacts, I'm not sure that I can answer how a court would consider the evaluation of economic impacts if it was deficient, but it certainly wouldn't probably help the agency's cause in defending the overall adequacy of the EIS if their economic analysis was poor. Just finally, on this point, as I mentioned before, the FEIS is due in early 2014. We'll have a very short appeal period. That's under city code. It's 14 days. And what we should see in the FEIS is written responses to every comment offered by the public and agencies. And then no more than 7 days after that, the master use permit could be issued. And both of those matters are appealable together to the City of Seattle hearing examiner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Executive. I'd like to start with this slide to remind us of the timeline. I think Mike has gone over this. The DEIS was released on August 15th. The city's 45-day comment period will close next Monday on September 30th. This drawing has been provided by the project proponent. It shows very well the neighborhood proposed for the arena. You see here it is in the heart of the Duwamish Manufacturing and Industrial Center, or the MIC. The Seattle Arena is on the north side of the street, Holgate, and is underneath this brown crown, sandwiched between the rail yard. Here you see the Sounder trains, and the BNSF container yard, which you see the gantry cranes over here. The port terminals are on the waterfront just to the west, and you can see the white SSA cranes. In the foreground, you see Holgate Street, one of only 4 east-west streets with through access between 1st Avenue South and Airport Way in the Duwamish. Holgate also serves as an important arterial providing access to and from Beacon Hill. The other important issue about Holgate is it has multiple rail crossings, up to 17, including maintenance yard tracks and the mainline tracks. And you may recall a presentation by the Duwamish MIC's Dave Gehring, which very aptly described the variety of transportation activity on this street. These rail crossings add complications for cars, trucks, pedestrians, and bikes, especially when the crossing arms come down and a train blocks the roadway. This next slide provides the footprint of this story, of the proposal, but we need to take a moment to get oriented as this map has north to the left. So Holgate, which we just discussed, is over here on the right-hand side. The green dots represent trees, which are yet to be planted. At the bottom of the site is 1st Avenue South, a major arterial carrying 20 to 25,000 vehicles per day. And the Safeco garage, another existing point of reference, is up here in the upper left. Again, at the top of the map is the east side of the property, where the Amtrak maintenance yard and Sounder maintenance yard and the main line railroad tracks connect our West Coast rail system.
And where are the railroad tracks relative to that access road on the top of the slide? Where do they? How close are they to the site?
They are directly adjacent, just off this side. The first several tracks that you see are maintenance tracks between the 2 sides of the yard, which is on both sides of Holgate, and then the main line tracks are just beyond, before you get to 4th Avenue South.
Bill.
And the access road, currently, what is that?
I did want to talk about the access road because when you say currently, the proposal is that it will provide access to and from the Safeco parking garage for vehicles coming in and out. It also provides emergency access to the proposal. But when you do say currently, Occidental Avenue runs here, currently runs through this site, and farther south, all the way as far south, past Lander to Horton Street. So Occidental currently serves as a relief valve for 1st Avenue South when 1st Avenue is congested or when there's a train blocking some of the east-west streets. So
and we are taking Occidental out.
The proponents, the arena takes Occidental out.
And we'll be putting that traffic on 1st Avenue next to the terminals.
It adds the traffic to existing traffic on 1st Avenue and provides egress from the parking garage on this private roadway, which is only open when there's parking at the
So, Jerry, that the prior picture,
Yeah.
I mean, I really think is super impactful to me, because you see the Amtrak rail yard, and we're not even talking about maritime industrial. I've heard from Amtrak officials that, well, number one, that is their only major rail yard in any major U.S. city that is bisected by a public right-of-way, being Holgate Street there. And with their projected growth in passenger traffic, again, saying nothing of maritime industrial, the gates at Holgate Street are projected to be down 45 minutes out of every hour during the daytime, basically foreclosing a major east-west thoroughfare in SoDo. And so the arena is just right on top of that. And my question is, Holgate Street has been mentioned as one of the possible east-west thoroughfares in SoDo to do a grade separation on, over what, the 17 rail tracks you mentioned. Putting the arena there, would that foreclose building a grade separation on Holgate Street?
The city has studied the potential of putting a grade separation on Holgate and found in their TSL and their tight specification location report that it would be very difficult to actually provide enough to get it in a way that worked well and was feasible.
Because
So
I mean,
think the arena would.
I keep going back to the Safeco Field experience, and I think we need to have that color our how we go forward on this arena proposal. And they're part of the deal for the industrial community acquiescing to having Safeco Field go in there was a freight quota of 519. And yet the Safeco Field goes in, the Mariners say, hey, we don't really like the idea of this nice, this freight corridor going by our nice new ballpark. And the project was stalled for, what, 6-7 years. So that, again, and I'm getting off topic here, but I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to speak about it later. But we need to make sure, that any mitigation proposals are done up front.
We would agree and have more to say about the proposed mitigation.
Commissioner Gregor.
A small point, it just seems to echo some of our earlier conversations here, and I vaguely understand the process for a street vacation for the city, I guess I should say, but it's pretty clear as the city outlines their process for a street vacation, it's supposed to be in the public benefit. They're taking a public right-of-way out of public use and turning it into a private. I'm just saying all of the words public over and over again, because it would seem that that would indicate that it's a part of a public project to include a street vacation in such a. And I don't know if this has been dealt with in the past, but your thoughts there would be helpful.
I've dealt with a few street vacations. There is a requirement that before they can take this public right-of-way, that they have to demonstrate public benefit. So I believe in this context, they say that there are aspects of the project itself, like the plaza space, will be a public benefit. They may well have to pay money or some other compensation for the right of taking the property.
So, Mike, I don't mean to drill down there for 1 second, but because I have this in front of me right now, it actually makes clear that mitigating factors does not, in and of itself, mean that they've met their public benefit threshold. That taking the public right-of-way out of to be perfectly honest, out of use needs to be a public benefit, and you can go ahead and do some mitigation on top of that. But to me, that seems there's a question about whether there is public benefit in that moment.
Well, I mean, we would say we don't think they've not demonstrated how they can deal with the traffic problems that the loss of that capacity would result in. Just because it's an important through and reliever corridor now. So to take that out of play creates all kinds of problems that they've not identified how they would fix, even setting aside the value of the street. So it's maybe something that cannot be mitigated.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
And I want to follow up on that, Mike. When they're trying to determine the public benefit of vacating this road, do they look at the benefits in isolation, or do they also have to take into account the costs? And for example, do they weigh a new plaza space against the loss of middle-class jobs to Canada?
I suspect in this case it's going to be they would consider this in a pretty narrow fashion. They would just look at the benefits offered up in more direct relationship with the street itself. I think the larger implications would not enter into the street vacation discussion.
This is slightly off topic, but it seems like there was a recent controversy in West Seattle regarding public benefit of street vacation. Is it kind of this same requirement that spurred some of those discussions by various interests in the city? Because basically that was the same argument that was being put, whether there was a public benefit or not, or they needed to rise to that in order to. Is that right?
I guess I would hesitate to answer just because I don't know enough about it. But I think
but it was a street vacation that was causing that conversation. I think that's really my point. Right. All right.
And the issue was its impact on family wage jobs.
And the issue was its impact on family wage jobs in West Seattle.
You could certainly make that observation.
I'd like to follow up with 2 more points on this slide. There is no additional parking proposed by the proponent. Parking is proposed to be provided by existing off-site commercial parking lots. So the DEIS does not include development of a new parking garage.
Is that precedented in any way that such a significant project would have no parking requirement?
Precedented in any way. The EIS does describe how they believe they could enter into agreements with other facilities to meet their needs, but they do not resolve the issue.
But I mean, if you want to build a house in Seattle, you got to have off-street parking, and I can't remember what the multiplier is, but I mean, it's just a requirement for anything. Okay.
Yeah, we can look that up. So I also just wanted to touch on the alternatives that are considered in the EIS. There's a no-action alternative. The third alternative is an 18,000-seat arena at this site. The fourth alternative is new construction of a new key arena at Seattle Center, and the alternative 5 is new construction at Seattle School District's Memorial Stadium, also at Seattle Center. The Port Commission has a strong and visible history of elevating the port concerns about this to city and county officials. And in addition to what's noted here, the memo also reflects letters you sent last year in the roundtable you held in January of this year. Actually,
do we have a copy of that letter available? I just think I would like to see it again. Not necessarily this moment, but
yeah.
For you to get that up.
Yes, we can get that to you. So regarding the framework for port concerns, from our review of the draft EIS, we have noted that the SODO location would encourage further incursion of incompatible land uses into the industrial area, and that the decision is counter to prior policies established to protect Seattle's port and industrial facilities. Secondly, the DEIS articulates some direct and secondary impacts of the proposal, but it fails to articulate others that could be reasonably anticipated. Irreversible impacts which cannot be mitigated are associated with incompatible land use, increased traffic congestion, impacts to rail operations, and safety. And I'll give examples of that on slide 8. Thirdly, the DEIS failed to fully evaluate alternative sites, including sites outside of Seattle, that would avoid impacts to the industrial area. And we've talked about that already. Fourthly, however, if these points are not recognized as valid, and should Seattle choose to approve the SODO location, then the proponent must be required to implement extensive mitigation to lessen some of the impacts. This slide relates to further comments we have on land use.
What are we looking at here for
Yes.
someone who might be just joining us?
The proposed arena's location is in the middle of our regional transportation hub. This is our crossroads here in the heart of Seattle. The Duwamish Industrial Center is served by 2 interstate highways, I-90 connecting from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and I-5 connecting the U.S. to both Canada and Mexico. This area also includes the railroad main line running the entire West Coast. In the past 2 decades, the port has spent billions of dollars upgrading our marine facilities, which are shown here in dark blue, and the railroads have similar investments in rail facilities. Private transportation firms have warehouses and transloading facilities. Those are all shown in dark blue. There are also many public transportation facilities shown in green, devoted to Metro Transit, Sound Transit Commuter and Light Rail, and Amtrak. Add to that the billions in interstate highway, bridge, and arterial infrastructure, all here in our regional transportation hub. It adds up to this transportation hub that cannot be replaced anywhere in this state. Export and manufactured goods from throughout Washington and the United States northern tier converge on this area, including seafood, equipment, aerospace, and agricultural products. While as much as 70% of imported goods move by rail to the American Midwest, the remainder move by truck to the Kent Valley, local distribution centers around the state, and on to Montana, Oregon, Alaska, and Utah. Here we have a growing employment base of 50,000 jobs and a significant contribution to the city and region's economy and tax base. Why would Seattle want to jeopardize this economic engine for an arena and entertainment hub that could be located almost anywhere? Our review of the DEIS has left us with the following issues. We spoke to land use on the prior slide, and specifically, also, Seattle's comprehensive plan directs us, and I quote, to preserve industrial lands for industrial uses and protect viable marine and rail-related industries from competing with non-industrial uses for scarce industrial land. Give special attention to preserving industrial land adjacent to rail or water-dependent transportation facilities. Siting an arena here would be an ad hoc decision contrary to existing planning and uses. With regard to transportation, the transportation analysis is complex, multi-layered, and very long. However, it only provides a PM peak hour modeling analysis. It leaves out the analysis of how the road system functions after games, the impacts of adding more days of traffic by adding more events to the neighborhood, how the increased activity could impact rail traffic, and how the permanent loss of Occidental Avenue would impact all-day operations. The DEIS did demonstrate that there was inadequate capacity for safe pedestrian operations, and unfortunately, the DEIS made no commitments to mitigate the transportation impacts. Regarding the economic impact analysis, the EIA in Appendix F actually references several of our concerns. They talk about rising industrial land values and rents, gentrification, industrial conflicts with incompatible uses, impacts of operational traffic. But the only quantified impact presented is the additional 4 minutes of delay per truck the truck operating in the PM peak would face, and they multiply that by a $48 per hour value of the truck's trip. So the EIA did recognize the risk to port competitiveness if Seattle were to become known as an unreliable and congested port. However, it states, while that risk cannot be reliably quantified, the importance of customer and carrier perception suggests that the appropriate measures to minimize the adverse impact should be considered. As far as mitigation, they offer some ideas with regard to traffic control and selected upgrades, but not the order of magnitude needed. And again, there's no commitment in the EIS to providing that mitigation. A couple more points on the alternatives analysis. We've talked about the limitations of the geographic extent of the alternatives considered. And in total, we would say the proposal to build the arena in SoDo is being made without sufficient information. In addition to the comment about what alternative sites were selected, we would note that the DEIS's analysis of the Seattle Center sites used different assumptions than were applied for SoDo, making the Seattle Center appear not to work while SoDo does. Regarding cumulative impacts, the EIS admits that this proposal could induce redevelopment of properties for commercial uses, changing the character of the MIC. However, the DEIS stops short of quantifying that impact and thus stops short of providing protection or mitigation for the industrial center. This is an inherent land use conflict with the existing uses in SoDo. Lastly, with regard to mitigation, because these impacts are not identified nor quantified, there's no mitigation offered for many of the impacts. Where the DEIS does identify mitigation, it's only proposed, and there are no commitments made by the proponent. Thus, we cannot determine whether these impacts can, in fact, be mitigated. We find there's insufficient information provided to the elected officials and to the public to determine whether or not the SoDo site is the appropriate location.
Jerry, does the EIS, where it talks about proposed mitigation, do they also estimate a cost of those various mitigation measures?
Not consistently, no. And I
I know we're still working through things, and all things being equal, this is not a good place to site an arena. I mean, there's so many jobs at risk. There's 35% of the city's tax base at risk. It's why risk it? On the other hand, I sort of think it would bolster our case if we came up with a mitigation number on our own, because, I mean, the realistic mitigation numbers I've heard range between $300 and $500 million. And you add that to the project cost at this site, I mean, that's a hugely expensive project versus, you might have a much lower mitigation number, say at Queen Anne or over in Bellevue or whatnot. So I actually think it would bolster the Port's case, the maritime industrial community's case, if we came up with a mitigation number, for the arena. I mean, I know on one hand we don't want to go there, but I think the arena proponents are saying, well, yeah, of course, we just have to do this and that, and, that will address the Port's concerns. That's not true. I mean, to properly, and we've seen with the history of Safeco Field, the region does not seem to have the commitment to come up with the funding that we need to mitigate. I mean, Lander Street, that was a requirement that still 15 years later we've made no progress on.
I imagine you do. There may be other comments too, but just going on to the next slide, we are working with other groups on related activities. And the industrial areas freight access study at the bottom of this list is an example of one where we are developing those mitigation needs. Not mitigation needs. We're developing needs for the freight area in the Duwamish-Mick. The mitigation that the arena needs to propose must mitigate all their impacts in addition to our, as well as contributing to the needs we have in the area.
Jerry, can I jump in here and really kind of piggybacking a little bit on what Commissioner Creighton just said? Maybe you can help me. You've done a very careful read. As currently, the draft EIS does not include proposed mitigation projects with dollar figures. And I think you were explaining that because the draft EIS does not get to a point where they actually quantify the impact to the community, except for, and I was scribbling, quote unquote, a 4-minute delay per truck and maybe $45 per minute. And I got to admit, I think of our port moving some 2 million containers, and I got confused at that level of detail. And so help me understand kind of the case that would make it such where a draft EIS would need mitigation projects. To me, I read this the draft EIS here and say, how could the city not propose clear mitigation to get there? But what's the fundamental weakness, maybe procedurally, that allows them not to put that forward? Is it, we got to quantify the impact first? We got to get them to better understand the comprehensive nature? How do I?
Yes, there's a whole series of links in this chain where we are finding that the analysis presented in the transportation study was incomplete and didn't address all the types of impacts that we are concerned about and that we included in our scoping letter that we submitted to them. Without those impacts identified and quantified, then they don't address or suggest mitigation, and thus they cannot commit to the mitigation that would make it viable. And as a result, the elected officials can't make an informed decision, which is the purpose of the SEPA process, to allow an informed decision about the alternatives.
So maybe you can help me align the timelines here. I mean, you've just explained again, I guess it helps put in context why we requested a little bit more time to comment to the draft EIS, because clearly the quantification of the impacts is important to be able to do this. Where are we on getting to those elements? Does that make sense? I know we've been working with the city to have them take a closer look there.
Right. So we will make that comment letter and submit that on September 30th, and they will have the ensuing several months to address those comments. We hope that they will redo the analyses as need be to get us to the information that's needed. But it's after we submit our comment letter.
Thank you. And help me, this industrial areas freight access study that you called out,
yes,
is underpins some of that as well.
Yes, that is getting underway now, and I believe has a 9 to 12-month timeline. I think there's a hazard here that that study will not be completed by the time the EIS is completed.
I have a question kind of following up on both commissioners, and this might be for Tracy rather than for you. If we were to go forward, as Commissioner Creighton suggested, and put together some sort of a rough package on what mitigation would be involved, and let's say it's, what did you say, Commissioner, $300 to $500 million, just to pull something loosely out. Given that this is a private project, does that $300 to $500 million fall on the private developer?
It's up to the city and their discretion as to what sort of mitigation measures they would want to impose. So they do have the discretion to require the private developer to provide the funding for that. And part of the responses that they provide to the final environmental impact statement, they're required to provide written responses, but they're not necessarily required to provide answers that we would necessarily like or think are adequate. So procedurally, they have to provide an answer, but it really falls within the agency's discretion as to the amount of what's called substantive SEPA authority. That is their ability to provide specific mitigating conditions as part of their permit approval in order before the developer could actually build the arena.
Can you think of other examples, or are there other examples where the city has provided the funds to mitigate a private project?
I'm not aware of one offhand. It is typical for the city to require the developer to pay for the EIS, pay for the staff time for reviewing, pay for any mitigation that's required to mitigate the probable adverse impacts of the proposal. That's the way the process typically works. I'm not aware of an example that you just pointed out.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
If I may just make one comment. You may have heard and recall from the City Council's arena discussion about the creation of a transportation benefit fund that would be funded out of revenues, tax revenues from the arena project. This project, this fund, which we were actually asked to contribute to at some point, it's been discussed, and I want to make clear what I think the intent was, that the fund there was created in order to create and pay for projects within the SODO area that would benefit the port and other users, but it would not be something that would be mitigation for the project itself. And we've been very clear, the port's been clear that mitigation for this project needs to be paid for by the developer who is reaping the benefits, not by the public, which we would eventually feel that if the public was spending its dollars.
Commissioner Bowman?
Great, thanks. Jerry, this is a question for you, and I appreciate how much time you spent reading this. You haven't brought up the safety issues along Holgate, and so I was wondering if you could touch on that, what the EIS says about that, and specifically, I guess I'm wondering, I'm looking at this rendering by the Seattle Arena, if you want to flip back a few slides, and so are there going to be sidewalks on Holgate now?
I sound like I've done a lot of studying on the EIS, and I have, but we also have a lot of people working with us on this project, reviewing it. And I'd like Marnie Heffron to come up. She has reviewed the pedestrian impacts and the safety issues at Holgate.
Okay, thank you.
Well.
And Marnie, I'm going to ask you to kind of identify yourself and your background for our audience.
Is this on? I'm Marnie Heffron. I'm the president and principal engineer for Heffron Transportation, and I'm an expert in transportation and traffic engineering and do a lot of work representing the Port of Seattle. As it relates to your question about Holgate Street, this EIS did quite a bit of analysis and actually came to the conclusion that there would be severe safety impacts along Holgate Street, particularly after an event where you have the flood of pedestrians who exit this arena and head back either to parking or maybe to transit, and they are crossing those tracks. As Jerry alluded to, there are 17 tracks that now cross Holgate Street, and so one of the analyses that was done, and we have some issues with it, but we don't dispute their conclusion, is that if the gates go down at one of the crossings, you'll form a queue back from that crossing, and those queues would be long enough to cross all of the other tracks. And so that, to me, is a very potential severe safety issue that is I mean, quite frankly, could be fatal. If we had that type of accident, it typically shuts down those rail corridors for quite a long time while there are accident investigations. So, you know, you have a tragedy, but then you also shut down your economy. They had mentioned as mitigation measures the possibility of a pedestrian bridge over the railroad crossings, but when it came, and they even mentioned that surface gates and gate improvements for the pedestrians may not be practical. When they got into the mitigation, they only list that they would consider surface improvements of Holgate Street. So there is no commitment to a pedestrian overpass on what is, they've documented as being a very severe pedestrian safety issue. I also think that it could be a very severe vehicular safety issue, because the same issue occurs where if there are cars stopped at the mainline railroad track, that queue will go back and cross other tracks as well. It's a very difficult corridor to manage.
Thank you, Marnie. I really appreciate that, because I guess I'd encourage, since I take Holgate into town several times a day from Beacon Hill, people cross over those railroad tracks all the time during the day, and I just can't really imagine what it would be like having a stadium right there. Maybe just a point of clarification on this slide as well. I'm a little confused because there is a Holgate Bridge, but it doesn't show on this slide.
The bridge actually goes to Beacon Hill.
Right.
So the bridge crosses
like
Airport Way, and the tail end of it is right about where those trees are. So right below where those trees are is where that bridge hooks into Holgate Street from Beacon Hill. It doesn't actually cross any railroad tracks. It's there to get you up the hill.
Right, but it's awfully confusing, because you come down Holgate and then on either side you're going to Airport Way. And just last year, unfortunately, I helped a motorcycle accident, somebody that was trying to cross over to the Office Depot right there. And there's a lot of potholes. It's a pretty unsafe street as it is right now. So is any of that addressed in the EIS?
None of that is addressed.
Okay.
So I want to just to follow up on that. With that many rail crossings, obviously for vehicles, you can put down the yard arm or the barrier, right, and kind of stop the traffic queue, and in theory allow that to clear. How do you time the amount of time? It's all timed, right? So I'm going to drop this and give it some time to clear, and then the train's going to come by. I would imagine it's difficult to create the timing, the delay necessary to allow both a vehicle to clear and to, say, allow a group of pedestrians or a family. You know, I'm just imagining a rainy winter night after Dad enjoyed a game with a few too many beers or something like that. How the heck are they going to get across that? And how do we know that they're going to be able to get across that?
Well, if you recall, we have two mainline tracks, actually three now, outside of Safeco Field that cross Royal Brougham Way. And we had several fatal pedestrian accidents at that location prior to us grade separating and bringing the pedestrians over the top. So even with a very simple crossing where the rail tracks are very close together with police officers who are often there after events, we had a safety issue at a crossing. How they could possibly manage 17 crossings, I don't know how you would do it. Not safely.
Thanks. Jerry, I'm going to ask you to kind of wrap up.
Perfect. So this talks about our next efforts. We anticipate we will be submitting our comment letter by September 30th, and we anticipate the final EIS in early 2014. I believe we're going to hear from Mr.
Okay, and I asked you to wrap up because I wanted to ask a couple quick specific questions, if I can, if my colleagues will indulge me just for a second, because I'm not really an expert in environmental impact statements. So reading through this, 400 and just the main document's 436 pages, I think. In the very first section, they're kind of setting things up. And so section 1.5, and I just want to make sure I'm thinking about this right, is entitled Significant Areas of Controversy and Uncertainty. So that's kind of getting the reader ready to know, well, what it is that the EIS needs to address, I suppose, right? Mm. And so one of the things that's identified there that's an issue of controversy is whether the city should issue development permits for the project in light of potential adverse environmental or economic impacts that may occur. So they're saying that there are economic impacts there. That's an issue of controversy, and this document is supposed to address that. That's what they're telling me there, right?
Correct.
So also, there's the direct impacts and there are indirect impacts. And so when you go to table 1.1, which is many pages long, I think that's a summary of both. Is that right? Trying to include, I think there's unavoidable and unmitigatable impacts that actually include land use as one of those. They've identified that once you've accommodated an arena there, you have made an unchangeable impact, essentially.
Exactly.
Right, and that's to land use. Then it moves on, and the document attempts to understand secondary and cumulative impacts and identify those. And if I understand it, we've got a recognition here that the construction benefits, or the benefits that come from construction, because the document looks at what are the economic benefits and environmental impacts of the construction activity, and then what are the same for the operating activities.
Correct.
And so the document tells us that the impacts of the economic benefits of construction are the same regardless where this is going to be built. Is that right?
Yes.
And just to cut this chase a little bit, the entire summary of all secondary and cumulative economic impacts. One statement is, and this is a quote, "A new arena in Seattle would add cumulatively to the venues available for sports and concerts." That is the sum total of the document's assessment of the cumulative and secondary economic impacts, and they make no distinction wherever it's cited. So is that telling me that those who prepared this are trying to convince me that redeveloping Queen Anne has the same economic impact in the city as a proposed SoDo arena, as Memorial Stadium? They're all the same, and the only thing that happens are more sports venues and entertainment venues?
As you're pointing out, we found a lot of information in the back pages that was not brought forward well to the...
So this is, okay. In section 3.6.1.4, it talks about the Stadium Overlay District as being a mitigating development for Safeco and Clink. Are you familiar with that? What created that? Because I was surprised, because that's actually being talked about as the reason why this is the right place for a stadium, but another arena, or this proposal. But it sounds like there was something else going on there.
Certainly, it's our understanding that the Stadium Transition Overlay District was created to buffer the industrial district from the impacts of the stadium.
To protect the industrial district. I think that's what the document actually says. Later in 3.6.1.5, cumulative impacts, they do note that this land use, changing to this land use, may make it more attractive to non-industrial users. So I thought that was a little bit incongruent with the point of an industrial, a stadium overlay district to accommodate the preservation of industrial land. But I also thought it was really funny when the document went on to suggest that such a change might be welcomed and seen as helpful to the industrial users. So if there are any out there who are going to testify, I'd be curious to know whether or not this is a friendly proposal to your industrial use. That's, I guess, I'm not trying to rant. I'm trying to make sure I am ready to rant.
Mr. President, I was struck by some language that I think is similar to your, but may actually, you did a good job of splicing two elements together. Can I just show you where they did it for us?
Sure.
For alternatives 2 and 3, there would be a cumulative impact of developing another large spectator sports facility adjacent to the two existing facilities. We all know what those are, in the area north of the industrial center. Land uses outside of the Stadium Transition Overlay District would likely change to serve the expanding needs and more commercial character of the Stadium District, in contrast to the industrial, commercial, and general industrial character of the Port of Seattle and the greater Duwamish-Mick. So I do have to admit that this, I think, is a good paragraph that explains a lot of our concerns. I have a concern that it's in Table 1.3, secondary of secondary and cumulative impacts, which makes it not necessary to address in terms of mitigation impacts. That would have to have been in Table 1.1, so that would get into 1.2, but we've thrown it down to 1.3. But I think they have put a nice summary of our concern. One of the concerns, not to speak for everyone here. I think that the challenge that I see is you're pointing out multiple places. Where are we going to actually address that in this draft EIS? Or maybe I should say at this point, since this is over and closed, where are we going to address that in the final EIS?
Thank you. And just, Jerry, if you wouldn't mind just going back one more slide to number 9, because something just struck me, and I was hoping that you could give me some clarity. Street vacation potential action as soon as early 2014. And so can you explain that to me? That sort of feels like it's jumping the gun. We don't have a team, but we're going to vacate a street?
Well, that's our point exactly, that we think it would be inappropriate for them to take action on the street vacation, which in strict terms, they would not get the street until the project actually took place, because the benefits would accrue from the construction itself. But we don't think that it's appropriate to give the developer that entitlement, even a preliminary one. So we have opposed the idea of moving forward with the street vacation.
And are there other instances, Mike, that you can think of where this has been given to a developer prior to a project moving forward? I mean, we're just on the draft EIS, and yet the City Council would provide a street vacation this early on in the process?
Well, typically, street vacations are associated with development projects, so you don't do them just for drill. I suppose there have been projects that have been delayed where they've approved a street vacation, but it would lay unfulfilled, so to speak, for some time.
Okay, thank you.
But Mike, now I'm confused. Technically, has the City Council picked a site?
No.
So why would they vacate streets when they haven't picked a site yet?
Well, they would probably follow in train with the action to approve a site.
But they're already making plans to vacate streets for a site they haven't yet selected.
Well, that's true, and they're doing lots of things. I mean, they're considering very detailed design drawings and schemes for the building itself. The Design Commission has moved quite a ways towards a design for a site, a project at that site. So there are many fronts where this is moving.
Actually, I was looking at my notes here in 3.10.1.2 in this document. I don't know, that puts it back around page 400 and something. The authors do note that the city comp plan, GD-P20, that the overlay, I think that's the Stadium District overlay, is intended to discourage non-industrial encroachment. So that seems like this proposal is not in conformance with the city comp plan, if that's indeed what the comp plan is trying to create, is non-industrial encroachment through the Stadium District overlay. One last thing, this is just striking to me. So I think the economic impact analysis was done by a group called Proforma Advisors, and admittedly, I haven't had a chance to look through the Proforma. That sounds like when you want to sell a stock, you know, interestingly. But anyway, so I didn't look through all the appendices because I didn't have time to do that. But this is the summary, I think, right here of Performa Advisors' economic impact. And that's the rest. So there you go. You got 2 pages and then all of this. That seems to me not a reasonable and serious attempt to evaluate economic impact, especially since in this summary, according to how they summarize Performa's work, there are only benefits. There are no costs between the alternatives considered. Did I miss anything? Okay, I guess not. Thank you.
Just a reminder that the staff is not the project proponent. Just want to remind the commissioners of that.
I took that as rhetorical.
And I'll just ask those who are ready to testify to bear with us. We've got one more person who's going to give some comments on the economic analysis. Mr. Cerf, we're ready for you.
Thank you. Thanks for the technical help here, getting this set up. I got involved with this. I'm Randy Cerf, and I got involved with this because a friend of mine asked me to take advantage of my expertise in this kind of matter to look at the economics. And I got into it without a lot of prejudgment. And in fact, I'm probably more qualified than he even imagined because I wrote my thesis on the functions of analysis in the political process. And I've got a Stanford MBA, and I've done lots and lots of business and economics consulting in one form or another. When I got into it, I think the word that best describes my reaction is appalled. There's some later slides that are going to go into some of the detail, but let me just go through the conceptual issues. This EIS fails to provide any meaningful data to compare the sites. It reaches absurd, and I do not use that word lightly, absurd conclusions that contradict a large body of economic research. And there is a clear and incontrovertible bias. There are dozens, and I do not understate, dozens of errors that either understate costs or choose not to analyze costs. And yet there is, as was pointed out by the commissioners, there is no hesitation to use analysis, even tenuous analysis, to find benefits. So there is a clear one-sided effort right here. And I could find no errors whatsoever where costs or benefits, I should say, were understated. Now, how is this relevant to the SEPA process? Well, as is pointed out, economics is not what SEPA requires. However, I would urge the commissioners to think about 2 things. The first is that there is a reasonable man standard that was alluded to earlier, and the economics alone provides a pretty good basis for making a case that this is not a reasonable or unbiased analysis. And second, what is SEPA about anyway? It's really not about ticking off requirements. What it's fundamentally about is giving the political process adequate information to make good decisions on behalf of the public. And so really, I wouldn't think about this in the narrow confines of what SEPA does or doesn't say. I would think of this as really SEPA is part of a process, and a political process and an analytical process that you need to figure out how to engage fully. Let me get into a little bit of detail here. This is really not relevant to the port itself, but it's a clear example of the analytical absurdity of the work. The EIS claims the arena taxes as a city benefit. Actually, the amount of taxes that flow to the project is $275 million, funding a $200 million debt. Isn't that wonderful? But these guys actually apparently didn't read the MOU. The MOU doesn't call for that. It blocks that $275 million from going to the city and instead diverts it to debt service. Minor point. And this is the tip of the iceberg in taxes. There are quite a few other tax issues that I won't bore you with today. Primarily, the primary economic tax assumption is that, gee, this is all found money for the city, so what are you complaining about? What it doesn't really look at is there are, in fact, a number of costs to the city in the scores of millions of dollars that this business will not be doing its fair share to fund, and those costs will come on to the other taxpayers. I don't have time to get into that kind of detail.
Excuse me one second, though. Those arena taxes generated from the operating activities, because once it's on the public tax rolls, there are no property taxes coming off.
Right. It's the taxes. The biggest single tax is the arena ticket tax, and then there are sales taxes and there are property taxes, and they all essentially get diverted to debt service. A little bit gets diverted to a arena mitigation fund, a SODO mitigation fund, which is capped at $40 million, and I believe we can probably find some consensus that that doesn't really do the job.
So, but I just want to make sure I understand this right, because I've heard, I think it was one of the city council members in addressing their concerns, that because the project will be developed while Mr. Hansen owns it, it would be included in the countywide values, assessed values. And that's a ceiling for assessing a property tax. So if you're a taxer like us, that's a good thing, because the pie just got bigger, so we have more property that we can essentially tax. And once it comes off the tax rolls, that kind of elevated tax base remains, but the taxes get displaced from this property, which is now off the tax rolls, to all the other taxpayers.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean,
this is going to cost me more money as a taxpayer.
It's going to cost you more money as a taxpayer, or alternatively, we can cut city services. Who needs who needs schools? And it really. I'm always worried right now, because I can talk for about an hour and a half on this, and I'm easily diverted. But there's a basic, you're talking about an equitability issue, and I'm actually thinking that if the city wants to provide this kind of largesse, I might start a $5 million investment in a new business. I'd ask the city of Seattle to fund $2 million of it, and then we'll divert all my taxes to serving that $2 million. So it really will only cost me $3 million to get in. Sounds fair. It doesn't. And really, in the overall scheme of things, it's not really fair. But that's not even really as central issue as some of the others. This slide here focuses on this slide. The slide that preceded and the slide that follows basically point to the analytical either corruption or bias or incompetence of the analysis. This one speaks specifically to the issues that affect the port. And a number of the issues probably don't matter much where it's cited, but these issues do. One of the biggest questions is, what impact will the arena have on the port, its business, its employees, on Lower Queen Anne, and the benefits or costs to other businesses, light industrial businesses in Ballard and SODO? They take a pass on this. Even though they analyze a lot of benefits, they forget to analyze this. But really, it's more insulting and more ridiculous than that. The EIS has the gall to characterize the extra time spent by a few truckers in traffic as, quote, the upper limit of the potential impact on the port, end quote. Strong statement, and pretty silly. Okay, we heard quite a bit on traffic right here, and I like to look at things at their sort of essence. And the real issue is this, and the real way they look at it is this. There's language in there that says, gee, there's a big traffic issue anyway, so what's the problem? It's going to get worse anyway, we're just part of that mess. And what this misses is a basic principle of economic analysis is analysis at the margin. So if you add 100 cars to an empty highway, there's no traffic impact. If you add 100 cars to a congested highway, there's a huge impact. Or if, as any of you know, if one lane is taken out on I-5 when you're commuting, it's a big deal. And so the two costs that they don't bother to estimate are, one, what would the mitigation costs be? And Commissioner Creighton, you pointed out that that's a nice number to have. And the second is, and this is kind of a finance tech-weenie kind of a point, but the second is, if investment is going to be accelerated, what is the cost of that? In sort of non-technical terms, it's what would we have to do to mitigate, and what would that displace that we might otherwise spend our money on? Or in geek terms, it's what's the present value of accelerating investment that you might otherwise be able to defer? They fail to look at the economic or quantify the economic cost to the viability of Key Arena. And one problem with economic analysis, it gets back to the sort of cost and the margin thing. If you've got something that's barely profitable, if you've got a business that's hideously profitable, and you were to tax it, it's not a big deal. If you have a business that's marginally profitable and you hurt its business by a modest percentage, you can put it out of business. And so Key Arena is now marginally economically successful. What happens to it if it loses 10% of its revenue? And what happens to the businesses around there? Not necessarily those that are thriving, but those that are just hanging on, not even looked at. There's no real jobs analysis in there. There are a few kind of tangential comments in there, and there's no real characterization of the number of jobs or how that gets weighed. And I want to point out something. If you guys are looking for nice little headline statistics, when you look at the revenue for a NBA team, about 60% of the revenue goes to about approximately 16 people. 16 people. There's the 12 players, there's the head coach, and a couple of the owners. And most of that money leaves the city. They don't even live in Seattle. Some of them don't even live in the metropolitan area. And if they have and most of them, Steve Ballmer won't be spending any more depending on how much the team does or doesn't make. And most of the players are salting away money for retirement. The business that they're displacing is different from that. Jobs at the port, that money recirculates and has what's called a multiplier effect. Low-wage jobs and other jobs that are being displaced have circulate to a far greater extent through the community. That's for the economic tally, but nowhere in there does it say, gee, if we do this, we might lose X thousands of jobs and we'll gain another 500 jobs that offsets it, or anything like that. They don't bother with that. Does the arena traffic discourage others from patronizing Pioneer Square or downtown? Now, attributing reasons is almost impossible in this world. So I've lived in Seattle since 1985, and Pioneer Square has gone downhill, it seems to me. And I've heard that the reasons for this is that people going down there to go listening to music, they don't know, they're interrupted so often by these various events there that it's hurt their business. Nowhere in this analysis does it look at what does the general traffic do to Nordstrom's, to Pacific Place, to Pioneer Square. They don't bother with that. They don't bother with commuter costs. They don't put any value whatsoever on time in traffic. My time is worth something, I hope. Okay, this is not an unstudied area. There is a huge body of academic research, and there is a remarkable consensus in this research that for a variety of reasons, stadium projects don't add a lot to a community from an overall economic perspective. I'm not arguing that they're bad things. I want the Sonics to be here. I'm a basketball fan. And an irreverent joke I heard about strategic. Strategic means it makes no financial sense, but we want to do it anyway. And I think bringing a team like the Sonics back to Seattle falls into that category. But it is not okay, in my view, to lie about it. So there's a large body of research that talks to substitution effects. And this body of research is really not touched on. In fact, when it comes to substitution effects, these guys make up numbers. And as you pointed out, Commissioner Gregoire, you were asking about numbers. They don't hesitate to do very detailed analysis on economic benefits and what they call induced jobs or indirect jobs. They do have an issue with doing an analysis on a fair analysis on substitution. Now, any of you who went to college, and I assume that you all did, know that basic economic research says you lay out what came before and you address it. You support it, you build up a detail, or you disagree with it, but you've got to address it. And that simply doesn't happen here. Instead, the EIS concludes, and they have so many tables and so many different forms, it's really hard to pick which number to extract, but they include $230 to $260 million of incremental annual economic benefit, earning an incredible $103 million per year. This would become the most profitable collection of businesses in U.S. history. So I read that and started to change my view. I'm for profitable businesses. Okay, now let's talk about what you guys can do about this here for a minute. The basic problem is that the EIS, and you pointed this out, Commissioner Creighton, the EIS, you need some alternative numbers. The EIS is the source of numbers, and the process does not really call for I'm sorry, the process assumes a, quote, unbiased process, whatever that means. And right now, basically what we're at, where we're sitting is we have a big stack, and if you trust this process to yield a unbiased stack of paper, I think you might be dreaming. This is what the source of the numbers is. Now, as was pointed out, the process means that they need to respond to these comments, but there's no real quality check here. What this is supposed to do, and getting back to the original intent of SEPA and the political process, it's supposed to create a reasonable dialogue about policy alternatives. And what you need to do, in my opinion, as a port, is to figure out how to respond. And I would basically demand a clean analysis. And really, the problem with the EIS is it's so thick that it looks like they did a quality piece of work. In a lot of ways, and getting to your 45-day comment period, in a lot of ways it would have been easier if they'd just written a paragraph that didn't say much and then you could comment on it. There really is non-analysis at all on a dozen important topics, period. So how can you comment? What you need to do is figure out how to manage this process any way you can to get the best possible dialogue. One thing that you said, Commissioner Creighton, that I totally agree with, I almost stood up and clapped, was that you need alternative data. Because at the end of the day, very few of us are going to read that stack of paper. At the end of the day, advocates and opponents are going to point at that stack of paper and say different things. That's all that's going to happen in the political process. And what you need is, in my opinion, is you need a piece of paper that you can point at that has different numbers. And then you also need in your submission to be crystal clear in its summary. When you look at the EIS, there is a summary at the beginning of it, and then it actually, interestingly enough, doesn't even agree with what it concludes later in the body of the process in places. But that's all people are going to read. And there's a litany of traffic issues that were mentioned right there. I think you really need to put some time into putting a really good summary together that basically says the EIS is not fair, it's incomplete, and you need a do-over.
Thank you, Mr. Cerf. Do you have other slides, or is this the last?
I do not.
Okay, so thank you so much for your work on this. Any questions? Thank you very much. I know we have, what I'm feeling is I've got, I think, 8 or 9 people that signed up to testify, and everyone's been very patient, so I want to get us on to that. So again, please confine your comments to 3 minutes or less. Justin Hirsch.
Thank you, Commissioners. Executive Yoshitani, my name is Justin Hirsch. I'm proud to be a union longshoreman here in the Port of Seattle. So we just heard some expert economic testimony, and I want to sort of apply that now to just what I see on a day-to-day on the ground at the port. So early in the morning, every morning, typically around 6:30 or 7 a.m., container trucks begin lining up at our marine terminals to conduct transactions. That is to receive imports and deliver exports to the port. So some of these trucks are local. In fact, if you drive down Occidental Ave, south from Hanson's property all the way to Spokane Street, nearly every single building on Occidental Avenue is a warehouse, distribution center, or a container freight station, and including, ironically, the property currently owned by Hanson's. But some of these trucks are not local. In fact, many of them have already come across Snoqualmie Pass at that early hour of the morning, loaded full of Washington's many exports: hay, grain, lumber, logs, hides, fruit. Probably not telling you anything you don't know there. Now, for many of these long-distance trucks, it's the same transactions in the container yard almost every single time. They come in with an export load, they drop off that export load, they pick up an empty container, and they drive that empty container back east over the pass. In many cases, they count on being able to do this twice a day. So I'll see a driver first thing in the morning. Hey, how you doing? Oh God, I'm all right, but we got a game later today, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it back. Right? Now, the buzz of activity at a marine terminal may seem a bit confusing. It's a confusing place, but it doesn't come together by magic. Right? It takes a lot of coordination, and a lot of these trucks hauling exports count on being able to make 2 trips a day. If they can't make 2 trips a day, if they don't come back, they're either going to go to another port or that transaction isn't going to occur, right? We're not going to be able to get our exports to the port to market. So I didn't see anywhere in the EIS that it expanded. I mean, it focused on trucking costs. That's what I happen to see because that's who I'm interacting with, right? But think about driving the cost of each individual transaction up, and then what that does to the total number of transactions that are likely to occur, and geographically where those transactions are likely to occur. Further, I just want to conclude by saying that it's really, really clear in the modern supply chain that it is not the port that decides where the cargo goes, and it's not the ocean carriers or the trucking carriers that decide where the cargo goes, but rather it's the shippers. And a new arena in the SODO location would clearly say to those shippers, we don't think your cargo is important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Scott Martinez.
Hello, my name is Scott Martinez. I'm a lifelong Seattle resident and a longshoreman as well. I'm concerned with the severe impact that this will have on my commute to and from work, and also as well as the impact it's going to have on the Port of Seattle as far as it being competitive with Canada and the Panama Canal and the other issues that we have coming up now. So I'm worried that the EIS statement, that the numbers that they're giving us aren't right, and the varying factors such as population growth. With traffic the way it is now, I live in Ballard. If I leave, it takes me typically 25 minutes to get to work. If I leave early, before 6 o'clock, anytime after that, it starts increasing, traffic gets worse. So by 8 o'clock, it'd probably be up to 45 minutes to an hour. So, and it even gets worse in the evening. If you don't hit the Battery Street Tunnel by 3 o'clock, the traffic starts backing up past all the way up to the zoo. It's just a nightmare. So the same way going north, it's let's see, at about 4 o'clock, it starts increasing. So it gets worse at night. So, and that's without the arena as it is now. So given the impact of the tunnel, the new tunnel, which is going to decrease lanes rather than increase, that will severely impact traffic also. And now, I don't know if the EIS factors that in, the surface traffic that's going to be that's going to come from that, and other varying factors. So, well, as far as it's just going to make it worse. So then we have the loss of street parking that's going to happen with the development down in the Pioneer Square. That's supposed to have some impact. We have then there's the safety issue on the rail. We've been talking about that. How are they going to negotiate that? So that's a huge issue. And then, so it doesn't, I'm just looking at it from, my point of view. It doesn't take much to figure out that this doesn't look like a very good deal. We need to really look at this, because once we do it, it's done, and it's pretty hard to reverse once it's done. So I just ask that you really look at this and look at the EIS statement. If it's not right, just let's not do it. Let's take our time, because we do have time right now. But once it's done, it's all over. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Goldman.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and Executive Yoshitani. And thank you very much for the opportunity to address you. I'm an environmental lawyer, and for the past 18 months, I've been representing the ILWU in challenging Seattle and King County's actions in connection with this arena. So many of the points that I was going to make about the inadequacies of the EIS have already been made, and I'm not going to repeat that, and I hardly don't have the time to do it as well. But I would like to echo what everybody has said. It is as bad as you think it is, and you've heard it is. What I'd really like to just do with the couple of minutes that I have is just review just exactly how bad this MOU was that got us to this place. And I'd like to just touch upon what I think is a very key issue that Commissioner Gregoire honed in on, which is the public-private project issue. The MOU was negotiated more or less as a done deal. And it did many things in this 37-page MOU that were simply totally putting the cart before the SEPA horse. It essentially limited the site, alternative sites, to the Seattle Center without any consideration of greater regional sites. It limited the city and county's ability to actually locate the arena at a preferred site, a site that the city or county preferred. So there's actually a limitation on the city even locating an arena elsewhere, aside from the fact that there's no one else to pay for it there in that place. It expected Mr. Hansen to go purchase an NBA team, representing, as we know in the Sacramento deal, representing to the NBA and to investors and all, that he had received a shovel-ready arena deal, ready to go, give us a team. It provided upwards of $5 million of development costs that would only be reimbursed if the city and county, in fact, chose the SOTO location. It specified that the city and Mr. Hansen would jointly commence a design review process for the SOTO building and a street vacation process, all of which would occur before SEPA took place, or in fact there had been no location. As a result of that deal, which was so one-sided and so putting the cart before the horse, we, ILWU, representing ILWU, we challenged this agreement in court. And both the Superior Court and the Court of Appeals regrettably held that our challenge was premature because no action, the MOU was not an action in the eyes of SEPA, that nothing had happened yet, that there was no commitment to do anything. We don't know what's going to happen. It was premature. So I want you to know that your friends at ILWU tried to stop the action right away, because we knew this was going to lead to what we now know is happening right now. But at any rate, we tried. I want to encourage, very strongly encourage, the port to challenge this in any way possible. Obviously, make sound policy arguments, factual arguments, legal arguments if necessary, political arguments. There's no way this needs to happen at this location. This was all a question of Mr. Hansen having played a game of putting $50 million into land right down the street. His business plan depends on this location. He has basically provided an illegal ultimatum to the city and the county that unless you put it here, you're not getting your Sonics back. And this is very much, as Commissioner Gregoire said, a public project for multiple reasons, and it should have been processed like that instead of an ultimatum, it's either here or nowhere. I urge the Commission to take every single step it can possibly take, and you have a lot of stakeholders shoulder to shoulder with you to challenge this in the Seattle and King County process as it winds its way through. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Warren Ackervik.
I'm Warren Ackervik, and retired Ballard Oil. I'm just a person that's concerned about the economic well-being of this community. I have to say I'm a little appalled that nobody admitted that Ballard existed in all the things that have gone thus far, other than one slight comment. And the BINMIC and the maritime fishing industry that is supposed to be reviewed and looked at in the port access study, along with Fisherman's Terminal, has a dramatic need for its connections to the SODO and to the maritime sources of supplies and equipment, and primarily in our spot, into fuel. Just to see how things happen, yesterday nothing was going to happen at the fuel dock today. I mean, it just didn't exist. Late in the afternoon, that doggone Keith called up and says, yeah, man, we're going to top off and we're going to go fishing, you know. So the Wizard comes in to take some fuel, and then Pinnacle says, well, yeah, we're going to go too, and we just got done with our shipyard stuff, so I need 60,000 gallons, and the Wizard needs 25,000 gallons, and oh gosh, there's a Whatcom County transport something that says, well, I need 3,000 gallons, and then the Kodiak calls up and he needs 10,000 gallons. Well, when you have a facility that holds 40,000 gallons and all of a sudden you get a demand for about 125,000, you need a transportation corridor. All the petroleum products that we have to get, as far as light products, all come Harbor Island, and they all have to be brought through the SODO area, and that transportation corridor is a key. I had the privilege of going down and running a bike truck safety thing for the Port of Seattle, part of that endeavor at Pier 25, which doesn't sound too difficult. A Friday morning, I left at 9:15 that function, and I was driving a semi. It took me 1 hour and 1 minute to get back to Ballard from that, and that's at 9:15 in the morning. So the transportation corridor is imperative that we have that open. The 4-minute delay, obviously I just explained to you, the delay in just one way in that day was at least 40 minutes. Usually takes, well, if I'm driving on the old routes, it used to take about 15 minutes, but that was in the middle of the night, and we don't expect that anymore. I was originally going to testify about how many jobs would be lost. Ironically, jobs will be gained. As we slow down, and takes probably 3 men to do what 1 man does, 3 trucks on the road rather than 1 truck on the road to accomplish the same thing, we dramatically increase the pollution and the time on the road and the congestion. And obviously, we don't want to be part of that. So what do? If we can at all possibly watch to see what's happening, I have the schedule for the Mariners games, I have cruise ship schedules sitting on the wall, and we try to avoid every bit of that, just to make sure that we don't become part of the congestion. Pretty soon we will not be able to supply the maritime industries as we create the more and more congestion. So my concern is, and I'd like to say that I would love to have the port commissioners be the city council and the city council be the port commissioners. It appears that the port commissioners are interested in the future of life, and the city of Seattle is only interested in the quality of life. Thank you, and hopefully you will do everything you can to change that location and put the arena in a different location. Thank you.
Thank you. Jordan Royer.
Thank you, Commissioners and CEO Yoshitani, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. It's not an easy thing to do. We're all basketball fans, or at least I am, and we want the Sonics back, and it's no fun being branded as anti-basketball when really all we're talking about is trying to figure out how best to have everything that we want to have in our city and have everything work well together. I think the drafters of this EIS would have done well to read the Seattle Planning Commission's study that they did on the arena, the comp plan that the City Council has passed and the mayor has signed into law. This isn't exactly rocket science here. You can't just pick up a deep water port and put it somewhere, but you can locate an arena in lots of different places. So I just want to say very shortly, everything's been said here already. I definitely agree with everything that's been said, and I really do believe that we can have it all in Seattle if we just don't have it all in one place. And I think any thinking person who would look at this would not be where you would put your next arena. I think there's lots of other places. I think the people who run Key Arena are very nervous about the impacts on this on their business and the future viability of Seattle Center. So there's a lot of things going in here that I think the people for Proforma, they came and met with us ahead of time. They really had no understanding of how a port operates. In fact, when they met with us, I represent marine terminal operators and the shipping lines. They had no idea, and they basically said, we build arenas, that's what we do. And obviously, that's what they're trying to do, and they want to put it here. But I think anything you can do to shine light on this process, you have a lot of people behind you. We'll support you as much as we can, and we certainly appreciate your leadership on this. Thank you.
Thank you. John Odlin.
Good afternoon. It's hard for me to follow a guy like Warren because he's got Norwegian seniority on me. But I'm actually here to talk about something good. We just at one of our facilities just reinstated our night shift, so we're operating 19 hours a day there. It's where we transload from hopper cars into 20-foot ocean containers. All of the products created in eastern Washington, like peas, beans, lentils, soybean, wheat, for export. And about 100 containers a day at that one facility, and we're pretty happy about that. You have to understand, though, we have to get all of those empties to our facility and loads back in about a 6.5-hour window every day. So this 4-minute delay is I'm not going to use bad language, but it's a crock. There's a much bigger impact when you have a very limited window of time. So anything that takes away from the smooth flow has an impact. We pay between $17 and $25 a day for the chassis. If we have a one-day delay on a chassis, then we pay another $17 to $25, and we've probably lost our profit. There are also detention charges for holding out a container longer than it should be of $100 a day. So we can operate at a deficit for only so long, and this arena will congest and inhibit our ability to prosper. And I think we since 1969 have provided a pretty good source of intermodal facility for the city. We have 3 locations in the city of Seattle, in the SoDo area, and we'd like to stay there. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Eddie Reed.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for the invitation. First of all, to solve the mystery, I'm here as a voice for Seattle Public Schools. When I was asked to consider, when my school was asked to consider to send a representative to talk about the arena and its impact on SoDo, my team and I got together and we basically formed a plan. And the plan was to focus on 2 things: a benefit and lack of opportunity. Little background, real quick. I operate, along with several of my colleagues, a STEM school. We're a STEM high school. We're actually right across the road from where the arena project is being proposed. The interesting thing, first of all, what a STEM is. That's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, for those who don't follow education things. And why does the school like this exist? It's really rather simple. I think everybody in this room has said it. They have a problem, and their problem is they're not going to have enough employees to fill the jobs that will come their way. And that is, even without the arena, impacting their opportunity to grow. And so with that, and by the way, that's a view across the nation. And so with that, the STEM initiative was created at the federal level, and then it filtered its way down to the state level to where now we have one. The benefit, the arena in and of itself, as those of us who work in highly impacted neighborhoods know that projects like that rarely boosts the fortunes of highly impacted neighborhoods. When you do the basic simple math of it, there's only the jobs that are provided. If you go to any sporting event, I challenge you to do this anywhere in the country. You go into an arena and just take a look, as I do. I'm a social scientist. I earned my doctorate at the University of Washington, et cetera, and so on. But when you look around at the jobs, they're not going to the young. Those jobs tend to go to a handful of mid-career, and that's not to slam them at all, but mid-career type individuals. Also, in terms of what happens to the community, this project, like projects pretty similar to that, we've gone through two of them. We've actually three, if you count Seattle Center. They have a huge ripple effect, clearly. And this project's going to have a major ripple effect on the very community that really struggles right before your very eye, and that's the south end of Beacon Hill and points south all the way to Tukwila. And here's the ripple effect. Rents will go up. As they have done. It's really interesting, when Safeco Field went in, I remember the conversation then was, it's going to provide tremendous economic development.
Please go ahead and take your time and finish your comment.
Oh, thank you, sir. It's going to provide a tremendous economic development for those who basically live and work in the area. It did not. When the Seahawks Stadium went in, we had the same thing. Again, a few of my students were able to find work there, but it was very temporary stuff, and it was also very low-waged stuff. And in addition to that, let's just deal with just the whole entertainment value of it. My community does not pay $68 a ticket to sit up in nosebleed land. That's why you don't see people, a lot of folks who look like me, attending those events. The economics just aren't in our favor. So where's the benefit then to this? Recently, I was asked to trim 6 FTEs off of my teacher role. Now, this is in the midst of this great debate as to economic development and growth in Seattle and prosperity. 6 FTE, that's 6 teachers, and if you haven't realized this yet, every subject that we now teach in schools are tested subjects. In other words, a kid cannot get out of high school unless they pass those tests. And so to do this with part-time people or .2 people is really a big challenge. So how does that apply to this arena deal? It's really rather simple. We would definitely, on the education side, in serving impacted communities, we would see a tremendous benefit to projects like this if there were other agreements attached to it, such as, how about an economic center located across the street that provides the training that our students need? Right now, our students do not have the capacity. We don't have the capacity to provide for them the opportunity to take what they're learning in the classroom and take it and apply it to the field. We have talked to practically everyone in this room who represents a major industry, and there is a great focus on keeping the industry alive, very little focus on providing that next generation of workers. But we're working that one out. But if you can talk through this project and figure out how we can get some real economic development out of this, I guarantee you that the citizens of the south end of Beacon Hill and those who are in impacted neighborhoods across the city would definitely applaud it. What was the headline in the Seattle Times just a short while ago? And that is affordable housing downtown. I've lived in Seattle now. I'm a newcomer. I've been here 31 years. And I will tell you that every year, practically, there is a headline that talks about affordable housing in the highly impacted communities. We've yet to see them. So I'm not quite sure. I've listened very carefully to the environmental impact statement. I learned a new acronym today. That will be very cool. And I will tell you that I have ninth graders, and I'm not being facetious here because they have to be tested on this. I have ninth graders who could easily figure out that those numbers in this report are not good numbers. But, you know, that's your task to do. I'm here to merely talk about benefit and benefit to the community in which I've dedicated a career to serving. And frankly, right now we have a concern. Once again, a parcel of land which could house another community college branch very easily and have very little impact on what goes on down there commercially, goes away into a private hand once again. Opportunity for that? For South Beacon Hill? Not very much. So priority. Priority is the key, and that's what I'm here to encourage, that in your consideration of what is viable and what is best for the city of Seattle, please do not lose track of those who dearly, desperately need to have support in order to join in on the economic prosperity that few of us are privileged to experience. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is it for public testimony. So I think I'll just allow any comments that we'd like to add to the discussion. I guess I'll just summarize by saying, perhaps on behalf of all of us, you know, as an agency, we're an economic development agency, and we do steward certain facilities in our community, and some see us as being very focused on those facilities as if that is our charge, is to operate them and them alone in the vacuum, as if they're orphaned and other businesses and jobs aren't dependent on them. But in fact, we view those facilities in light of our overall mission, which is economic development and the creation of opportunities. And I think that the biggest concern that we have with this proposed arena and the assessment is that we're shortchanging looking at the impact on the economic situation in our city and our region, and we're really undercounting our need to create opportunities. Fundamentally, there's a strong connection, really, I would say around the country, where you have a healthy industrial, manufacturing, producer economy, you have a healthier middle class. Where you don't have that, then you don't have a middle class. Just think of San Francisco relative to Seattle. So one of our concerns is if this project serves to undermine the health of the urban, maritime, and industrial sector in our city, then we are definitely working against the interests of the middle class. And Seattle takes another step down the road of gutting itself and hollowing out its economy and becoming a place of rich and poor, which is 180 degrees opposite of our hope and aspirations. So thank you for your time, everyone who testified. And Tay, I will kick it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we will have a couple of other briefing items, but we want to squeeze in this one action item that we have today. This is 6A, and this is the authorization for the CEO to, number one, advertise, award, and execute a major public works contract for the construction of the North Satellite Refurbished Baggage System Project, and secondly, to authorize the use of port crews. The request for $11,987,000 is in addition to the $3.76 million that was previously authorized for a total project authorization of $15,747,000. George England and Dave Soike will be the presenters.
Well, good afternoon, Commissioners. Mr. Yoshitani. First, I'd like to acknowledge Susan Kostoff, Program Leader for Alaska Air Group, my counterpart in managing the North Star program for Alaska and the partnership between the port and ourselves and Alaska. She apologizes she could not attend today, but wanted for me to convey Alaska's support for this request, which is to authorize the construction of the refurbished baggage system project, and this is the first of 5 major capital projects as part of the North Star program. This project is to make improvements to extend the life of and improve the reliability and increase the speed of the existing C-88 and C-92 baggage systems. And there's a picture at the end of the memo, which unfortunately I don't see up here for us to show. And those baggage systems are located to the north end of the airport plan in general.
As you have that photo and that diagram in our packets.
Yes, yes. And as you're aware, Alaska has now been out at the North Satellite for several months, and this includes utilizing the existing baggage system, and they're frankly pleased with how it's helping their operation. Over time, Alaska's baggage volumes will basically be or end up 5 times greater than United's use of the system ever was. So the concern is that volume has an impact on the existing systems. Also, these systems were put into operation based on the year reflected in their names. So C-88 became operational in 1988, so it's 25 years old. And then for C-92, of which it was a project I actually worked on, was 21 years old. Typically, these systems have about a 15-year life. So we believe they're getting close to their productive and efficient life. The original scope of the project, when it was Alaska's project, was to replace the entire systems in their entirety. As the project transitioned over from Alaska, the port worked with them and we reduced the scope to focus on replacing only aging components such as belts, motors, drives, controls. And the whole point was to efficiently sort of improve the system and its functionality because of the significant operational benefit to Alaska. The team also identified some items, and they were expressed in the design authorization, that we'd have some below-the-scope lines because we needed additional information that would come out of the design process and make a determination to incorporate those into the project. And working in partnership, we also developed a good, solid evaluation criteria along with metrics to really minimize the cost of this project and the cost of refurbishing the systems while maximizing its improvements. And I think this is reflected by our forecasted budget as part of this action for a total budget of $15.7 million when the original budget in the program is at $22 million. So a little shy of about $6 million savings so far. So during the design development, and also due to a baggage system failure, unfortunately, that impacted Alaska here recently, Alaska's senior management then asked us to conduct 2 failure analysis, 1 on each system. So a failure analysis analyzes the baggage system to look for points of failure that would have significant operational impact, and then to identify potential fixes, repairs, to eliminate those points of risk. So we have completed that analysis for the C-88 system, and as a result, the scope within this request has been moved above the line, including adding a redundant recirculation conveyor out at the North Satellite, something Alaska originally had not anticipated was necessary, but we proved to them through this failure analysis it was absolutely the single most critical point of failure. If the original one belt system went down, they would be unable to operate. In addition, the C-92 analysis is underway. However, we have included scope within this authorization, which currently is not yet determined whether to be incorporated. So as a result, and Alaska agrees with this approach, we'll complete the analysis. The team will decide what should go into the project. We will report back to the Commission informationally as to what we include that is in this authorization, then that will be actually put into the project, and then defer and remove from the project and the budget those components that we don't do. We do this in essence of the schedule being critical. There is components that we are relying on port construction services to complete that must be done in accordance with Alaska's operational needs by May of 15. And then we will advertise for bid this November after completing 100% design, and also obtaining Alaska's concurrence, which is a requirement in our letter of understanding with them before we actually go out to advertise for this project. So the $12 million request, or approximately 12, includes all of this scope. The schedule, as I said, advertised for bids probably early December. Start of construction for the major project begins March of 2014, now completing on an extended schedule to March of 15. This differs from what the memo actually states as October 2014, and this was driven by some recent phasing construction coordination efforts with Alaska and their operational needs, which has driven us to extend our construction schedule. And as I said, PCS will begin purchasing materials and performing work in refurbishing the tunnel section, which is also important to increasing the speed of the system sooner than later for Alaska. And this work must be completed by May of next year. The project is under a programmatic North Star PLA, and I'm pleased to report that the negotiations are reaching their final stages. This PLA will be incorporated into the bid documents. We have yet to work with our Office of Social Responsibility to establish the small contractor supplier percentage. That will happen within the next month or so. And as Susan wanted me to convey, Alaska's appreciation for the port's flexibility, collaborative development on this recommended approach, and focused efforts to include additional scope as their senior management has requested. And they are fully in support of this request and authorization, understanding that they do have their point of final concurrence at 100%, which will occur in November. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, George. Commissioner Bryant.
I just move adoption of item 6A.
I second.
Very well. Any further discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you very much, George, for the thorough rundown.
Okay, thank you, Commissioners. We have a couple of briefings for today. The first one will be the Part 150 Noise and Land Use Compatibility Study Update and Recommendations. Stan Shepard, Rob Adams, and Landrum and Brown will be the presenters. Stan?
And good afternoon, Commissioners and Mr. Yoshitani. Today we're happy to be here to give you an informative and I hope comprehensive briefing on the Part 150 and the conclusion of the study. It'll include all of the recommendations that you'll see in the draft Commission resolution that'll come up within the next few weeks also. We have Rob Adams here, who is with us from the consulting firm of Landrum & Brown, and he's performed many Part 150s throughout the United States and has held the project management of this project since we began several years ago. Just to give you an idea of what a Part 150 is, it's the opportunity for us to go in through and evaluate all of our noise programs at the airport. And it's a part of the FAA's FAR, Federal Aviation Regulation, Part 150. So it's part of that regulation that establishes the guidelines on how we go through and evaluate those programs. The end result is a noise compatibility plan, which contains elements of the proposed mitigations, which you'll also see in that resolution. At the end of the program with that noise compatibility plan, if this whole process is approved by the FAA and all of those elements are approved by the FAA, the end result is they are then become eligible for approximately 80% grant funding by the Federal Aviation Administration. So that's what really the end result does for us with a lot of this. And to give you an idea of what Part 150s don't do, they're not intended to really restrict air traffic at the airport or shut down the airport or to put any restrictions on air traffic at all. And it's not intended to move air traffic from one community to another. It's really intended to look at the impacts within a confined area, which we'll describe for you here in a little while. To note that we've been through a very extensive public participation process with this. So it's required by the Federal Aviation Regulation that we do an extensive public participation. And I think Rob will contest to this that we had probably one of the most comprehensive public participation processes throughout this that most any other airport's ever been through. We left it open to anyone to participate. We held 5 large public workshops throughout the process, and we invited everybody in from the public to participate in the workshop and present their ideas on noise reduction and how that could be achieved. We had a total of about 500 people attend these meetings throughout the process, so it was very comprehensive. We also had what we called a technical review committee formed, and that was comprised of the local land use planners, the Federal Aviation Administration, WashDOT, Department of Transportation Aviation, and some airline representatives also that gave us their input on the study and how we could get through it and help the airlines and everybody involved with it. So all the recommendations that you're going to hear today are a part of that public process. So everybody presented their ideas, and we looked at those and what could and couldn't be done within that FAA regulation, Part 150. And I'm going to turn it over to Rob Adams now to discuss anything that I might have missed in this preparation discussion, and also to go through each one of those mitigation items in depth. Now, this is the opportune time for you to ask us questions as we go through and to make sure that you all understand these recommendations, because we're going to come back on December 8th for first reading of the resolution for the Part 150. Or October, sorry about
October 8th, and
October
the second reading
October 22nd.
Yeah, 2 weeks following that.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So I'll turn it over to Rob now.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, good afternoon. Mr. Yoshitani.
No. Here we go.
Oh, sorry. Good afternoon. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present this to you today. As Stan mentioned, the Part 150 process that has been unfolded here over the last couple of years, it's not the first time that the airport has gone through this process, and in fact, the first time that this was done was in the mid-1980s. That's important for you to understand because many of the programs that we're going to talk about were initiated back in the 80s and also through the 90s. And I would characterize this as an airport with a mature noise abatement program. So knowing that as we went into this study, we recognized that it was very unlikely that there were going to be major changes or major program additions. However, we were able to identify some improvements that we'd like to present to you today. So the first slide here, just to give us a little bit of a frame of reference, north is to the right side of this map. And what you see on here, there is a green boundary that encompasses an area, wholly encompasses the airport. That boundary was established in the mid-1980s, and what it essentially did was it said any of the residential properties that were located within that green boundary line would be eligible for many of the port's programs that were being developed. And the primary one of those was sound insulation, which is a package of new windows and doors and sometimes actually blown insulation into the houses, all in an effort to reduce the noise from aircraft on the inside of the house. So you can see that area that was developed. The FAA's guidelines require that periodically that those boundaries are updated to reflect noise levels that we have today and what we might expect in the future. That's one of the major products that comes out of this Part 150 process is an updated expression of the noise levels around the airport. And for this study, what we found is this thin black line that you see here that goes around the airport, we call that a noise contour, and that represents where the federal threshold of significant noise levels are today. In fact, actually, that's where they would be in 2018. So even looking 5 years into the future with growth, and so as I mentioned, the federal guidelines say that we need to update any of these remedy boundaries to reflect the current expression of noise. So the orange line that you see on the map represents what is the proposed remedy boundary. And again, within that area, any of the port's current programs or any of the new programs that we're going to talk about would be included in that. Did you want to mention something about the work that had been done?
Yeah, I sure will. So the area between the gold boundary and the green boundary there is the area that's not going to be eligible for insulation programs in the future, simply because the noise levels are being reduced at the airport. So what we've done to make sure everybody that was in that area that was eligible for the program, we sent out certified letters to their homes. This is about the third time we've done this in the past 10 years to make sure that they get into the program. So we're encouraging them to get in the program now. Sent out the letters. We gave them a deadline to send in their applications, and that was to about 320 homes. We received about 90 responses back that were determined to be potentially eligible, and right now we're working with those to get them through the insulation process before this Part 150 is taking place, and that new boundary is the official boundary. So we're doing everything we can to make sure everybody takes part in the program before it's shrunk.
Okay, so I just once again, I'm just going to restate what I said there. All of the programs that we are about to talk about would apply to the area within that gold or orange boundary.
Yeah, so basically, because I think you guys can kind of move through, step through pretty quickly because we're fairly familiar with this, but what this map is showing us is the noise footprint is reducing, and that's reducing because of quieter jets, new technologies in terms of how airspace is managed, and takeoffs and landings and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's primarily the quieter engines on aircraft. Yeah.
Very good.
Okay. Okay, so I'll move through these here pretty quickly. These are all programs that you currently have in place, but there are some, in some cases, minor modifications to those. The first, I've already mentioned, the single-family sound insulation would be applied only to the areas within the new noise remedy boundary. In the past, you've had multifamily owner-occupied, which essentially means condominium type of units that had been offered sound insulation packages, but had been on a very limited scale. We're looking to expand that to larger condominium developments before it was smaller unit types of developments. The next item is the Fly Quiet program, which is the program that you have in place to encourage airlines to follow the noise abatement procedures. There's a few modifications to that which have actually already been implemented. They were identified through the process, but went ahead and implemented some of those modifications. Likewise, you have a noise monitoring and flight tracking system that we're recommending upgrades to. And again, the process of that is actually already starting. We're not waiting for, we don't have to wait for the final approvals for that to begin. There's an area that was defined off of both the north end and the south end of runway 16 right, 34 left, and they were called approach transition zones, or ATZ. The north ATZ area, it was recommended in previous studies that all of the residential structures within that would be purchased, and those people would be relocated to another area. The south ATZ, however, had not yet been completed. So we are recommending that that program continue forward. The only modification to that is there's really very few residential properties down in that southern ATZ. The modification we're making is that it would be a voluntary program. So the port would offer acquisition. If a residential property owner said, no, I would prefer not to leave, then that's the end of the process. There's no eminent domain or any forced, having anybody forced out of their home for that area. The next item has to do with your current engine testing run-up regulations. Right now you have in place regulations that dictate when and where engine run-ups can occur. One of the new recommendations is to implement a ground run-up enclosure, a new facility. So if that does in fact occur, then we'd want to update your regulations so that it references the use of that facility.
And I'm just curious if the Part 150 program is linked with the operating regulations, or are those operating regulations are something that's negotiated between us as an airport authority and our tenants?
Yeah, those are very separate. So the conditions of the operation of those and the hours of operations for something like that would be separate from the Part 150.
Okay. I'm going to go through these next slides pretty quickly because these are actually programs that you have in place, but there's not going to be any change to these at all. So these include property advisory services, local government remedy support, and funding for land use and noise compatibility planning, preparing cooperative development agreements with the local jurisdictions. Those all sort of fall in a category that I would say it's outreach that's being done by the port, either to individuals or to the surrounding jurisdictions to help them work through land use compatibility issues. No changes to those. We would expect those to continue moving forward just as they currently do. The last one on the slide is working with the airlines to limit nighttime flights, and again, your flight quiet program is a good avenue for that. So again, continuing that type of outreach to airlines and pilots. The next item is a technical issue that deals with some of the navigation equipment and the way that these navigational aids are used. Again, no change to this. This is just a way to help maintain aircraft where they should be flying with your noise abatement considerations. Likewise, the preferential runway use, no change to that program being recommended. Using what was called Flight Management System Procedures, or FMS. It's now, they have new names for them. Sometimes they're called RNAV or RNP. These are all designed to have aircraft fly a more precision path, either leaving or approaching to the airport. So it's the encouragement of those types of procedures. Continue port doing that. And then the final one on this slide is the use of ground equipment, which deals with power and air-conditioned air at the gates themselves. And Stan, you were mentioning.
Yeah, I just got an update on that project. So for like preconditioned air, they're about 2/3 complete on that throughout the entire airport. And within the next few months, they plan to have completion on that project. So that's a good thing for noise also.
Yeah. Yes. On the next slide is the insulation of schools. The port and the FAA had committed many years ago to the insulation of schools around the airport. That program, that commitment is still there, and they will continue as long as funding is available from the FAA. So no change to that program. So now we're going to talk about the new measures that came out of the study. And again, as Stan mentioned, I think it's very important to mention again that there was a lot of analysis that we did on these these particular measures, and there was a lot of input that we received, both from the Technical Review Committee, from you, Commission, and as well as from the public. So none of these, I think, were taken lightly. We had a lot of input on these. The first is multifamily tenant-occupied insulation. We were talking about owner-occupied before. This is now essentially apartments. Apartment buildings. In the past, apartment buildings had never been really offered sound insulation programs. And so we are looking at this to say, okay, it's very soon, all of the single-family residential will be completed. So now we're starting to look at these apartment buildings. There are several issues of equity, of, you're investing in an apartment building, so, does that raise rents? Does that, who's really the benefiter of that? Is it the apartment owner, or is it the people that are living in there? Several issues have been brought up on how you physically do this, how you put the sound insulation in a large structure. I can tell you that airports have done these programs, but there's not a lot of them, quite frankly, that have done apartment buildings. So our recommendation is to put it in the program and to look at it as what we call a pilot project. So it gives you the ability to study the issues more, maybe even go out to an apartment building or two and start the process just to see exactly how it occurs and how it unfolds. Before you commit to a large program with, with many buildings. So that's the first item there. That's the first new program. The next item here is the avigation easement purchase on individual parcels that have a mobile or manufactured home on the site. So essentially think there's a house that has a mobile home sitting in the side yard or in the backyard. Most of the communities around the airport, that's technically not a legitimate use, but in some cases it is. This is a program that would look to encourage those property owners to remove that mobile home from their property in exchange for a navigation easement. Essentially, the reason behind this is that mobile homes, it's virtually impossible to sound insulate them. Just the construction technique of them. And many of these mobile homes, we did a survey of the area. Many of them, you couldn't move them even to a new park. So they're essentially there. They're not going to go anywhere, and you can't really insulate them. So we're looking to the property owners to try to do something with that. Again, there are several factors related to existing zoning and how exactly you would verify that okay, they've moved that mobile home off, but they haven't put another one back on later, and things of that nature. Therefore, we're saying again, let's look at this as a pilot project. Take a few of them. Let's learn how, in fact, the best way is to implement this before we reach out to the other property owners. At this point, we've identified about 70 properties within that gold boundary where this appears to occur. The third bullet here is looking at churches or places of worship for sound insulation. Churches are considered noise sensitive, particularly during service times. However, we recognize that churches oftentimes are built of a different type of construction. Sometimes the windows, you think the stained glass windows themselves, we can't just throw up a regular sash window in there and call it a day. So churches usually present a unique challenge in terms of sound insulation, just because of the construction and also because of you're really looking at just certain times that you're dealing with. So for each of the individual churches, and we have a handful of them, we would recommend doing a feasibility study specifically for each church to say what type of program could you implement.
Commissioner.
Yeah, maybe I'm just understanding again the old Part 150 basically just said single-family homes and not much more. So the new Part 150s, what I'm trying to say is the scope here is, geographic scope is more limited, but I would have thought churches would have been covered before. So churches are new completely.
Yes, this is a new addition to the program. Yes. And then the last item that's on the slide here is to establish feasible locations for a ground run-up enclosure. We mentioned those just a moment before. I'm going to show you the map to show you what the conclusions of the study were. We looked at essentially the entire airport for a site that could accommodate both, number one, accommodate a ground run-up enclosure, and number two, was not going to create some sort of a severe operational hazard or constraint to the airport. And what we ended up with was we initially looked at 6 sites in detail, and we found that 3 of those sites could in fact house a ground run-up enclosure. Site A sits to the south of the airport. Site B sits on a site that's currently being used for remote overnight parking. And then Site D, which is kind of midfield onto the north side of the airfield a little bit, that's where the U.S. Postal Service building was. It's now being transitioned to a aircraft parking area currently today. Could, in the future, have a ground run-up enclosure, but today it's being used for aircraft parking. So those are the 3 sites, and essentially what happens with the Part 150 study is it says, we present that to the FAA and say we have identified locations where a ground run-up enclosure facility could occur. We've also acknowledged that these types of facilities tend to reduce noise by about 20 decibels, which is, in the noise world, is a big deal. We've looked at the specific types of reductions that could occur around the communities, into the communities. So we think it's a good idea to include it. By including it and having the FAA approve it, it then becomes potentially eligible for grant funding. Doesn't mean you have to build one. It just means if you chose to build one, you would then be able to apply for grants to help offset the cost of that. Okay, the final measures that I'll mention here are called program management measures, and what these are designed to do is to assist the implementation of the program. And I already mentioned one, which was to replace and upgrade the noise monitoring and flight tracking system that's currently underway. The FAA requires that we have a statement in the study that says that you will periodically review and update the noise maps, that noise contour, and or the entire program if it's warranted. It's a voluntary program. You don't have to update the program, but if there's some warrant for it, then they would suggest that you would do that. And then the final item here is the continuing operation of the Noise Programs Office, which deals with is really the interface directly with the community for the port in terms of dealing with noise issues. We're going to talk now a little bit about the public hearing and the comment period that occurred. The draft Part 150 study.
Give me one second.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, Rob, if I could just go back to the new measures slide. So, and sort of thinking this through, in the old Part 150, we funded noise mitigation measures for single family. Now we're looking at multifamily tenant and places of worship. Another non-single family structure use, I would think it would be worthwhile to look at funding noise mitigation for would be retirement homes. But I think we've had this discussion before, and just confirm, I think you said earlier, or in months past, or maybe Stan, it was you, there are no, of the retirement homes and the airport community surrounding the airport, there are none within the revised noise mitigation boundaries?
That's correct. That's what we had found, that there were none within there. I want to be clear, too, that we have insulated over 9,300 single-family homes out there and spent about $400 million on insulation to date.
How many million?
400 million.
Speak right into that microphone.
400 million. So a very large program we've had since 1985 with these.
Okay, so the draft Part 150 and SEPA documentation was we had a comment period on that that was published on April 15th of this year. We held a public hearing for the Part 150 as well as the SEPA determination. That was held on May 15th, 2013, so it was a 30-day period that we gave people to review the draft documents. We then held the comment period open for an additional 15 days beyond the public hearing, so in total was a 45-day comment period that we provided people the opportunity to make comments. We received just over 70 comments, and the range of comments is listed here. There were some just general noise comments. There were ones about abatement programs, land programs such as sound insulation. There was also ones that dealt with just general environmental issues, air emissions, water runoff, things of that nature. We did not ignore those, even though those were not technically within the scope of our study. We did put all of the comments that we received in there, and we did prepare responses, formal written responses that will be included in the final Part 150 study. We worked with the FAA. We provided them all of the comments as well as our draft responses to them, so that they had an opportunity to at least see what the comments were and what the responses were, and in many cases they gave us some suggested, hey, you may want to look at this, or you may want to think about these other issues, which we incorporated their comments into the formal responses. So those are all included in the final Part 150 document. Okay, we can talk now about the next steps, and primarily we already started to talk about this. So this is a briefing. This is your opportunity to ask Stan or myself questions in this format. But the first reading of of your resolution is actually, on the slide, technically those are wrong dates, so I'm going to update those just verbally for you. The first reading is October 8th. The second reading would be October 22nd. And then after that, we would expect that maybe on October 29th, essentially a week later, if in fact you did adopt the program, we would be ready to submit that to the FAA to begin their process. They typically take about 8 months before they will issue their approval process. That's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer.
So the FAA, in deciding whether or not to offer grant funding or make grant funding available, will they do they look at the program as a whole and either thumbs up, thumbs down, or do they cherry pick different elements of the program and say we'll fund A, B, and C, but not D, E, and F? Or?
Good question. So I just want to be clear, I want to make sure you understand what happens. So the first process is actually not a grant funding question. It's a question of, does the recommendation meet this Part 150 threshold for reducing noise? If it does that, it becomes approved for Part 150 purposes, and they do go through each measure individually, and they say this one is approved for Part 150, this one's approved, and if they disapprove one, it would say disapproved or no action needed. So that's one step, and then at that point, the port can then apply for grant funding, and it's on each of those individual measures that you would apply for, like a ground run-up enclosure. You would then apply for a grant, and then they take that. It's already approved from a Part 150 perspective, so that checks that box. Then they start looking at all of the other grant applications that are coming in from all the other airports in the region, and then they have a budget, and they say, okay, now we have to prioritize these, and they start handing out the grants in that respect. So it's kind of a two-step process to get to funding.
So if I could ask a follow-on question. So with all of the staff recommendations, are there any measures that you think might not be approved by the FAA, number one? And then number two, a follow-on question to that, whether, even if a measure were not approved by the FAA for purposes of Part 150, that's still, this port or the commission could still go forward with that project. It just means that it's not part of the 150 program and it's not eligible for funding.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And to answer the first part of your question, we don't believe at this point that there are any of the measures that the FAA would disapprove. They've been involved. We would hope that they would have brought any of those issues up to this point, but I haven't seen anything in here that's out of the realm of what's occurred at other airports. So.
They've reviewed all of these documents numerous times, so nothing's going to be a surprise to them.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, and we have been talking about this, I think, since I joined the commission almost 4 years ago.
Yes.
And so we had similar briefing prior to the submission to the FAA of our draft document. So we've been through this a few times.
Yes. Yeah, we're coming to a conclusion now.
Oh, really?
This is what it is.
About time to start the next 150 process.
We'll talk about that.
It's good business here, Rob. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Very good.
Thanks, Stan. Okay, the next briefing is the 2013 second quarter update on the airport's North Star program. And George England will be the presenter.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, and Mr. Yoshitani again. Let me get I'll be brief here. All right, here to present second quarter update for the North Star program, and I think my focus, in essence of time, unless you have questions specific, will be just a quick review of the overall budget. Do want to point out this should reflect a little bit of well, not quite yet. Next time we'll update it for the savings on the baggage I just received authorization for. Schedule's tracking well. We're a little bit behind on a few of the projects, not significantly, but for good benefit, which I'll touch on. So the key thing I wanted to talk about was metrics. You had asked a couple of briefings ago, I think in March, to have a better understanding of what metrics we might present to represent how we are doing on projects. So first I thought it would be to just explain sort of the approach. And typically on construction projects, we know we have operational impacts when we do work. It's inevitable. But we try to set out and manage those as part of putting together our construction projects, our construction phasing, doing the collaborative and coordinative effort, as I spoke to a little bit on the baggage system, which is exactly the result that should come out of that, is a good solid plan that everybody realizes Alaska has constraints on their baggage system, etc. So these construction plans really do the best they can, and again, to the extent possible, to create a baseline for the project, off which we will then present to you our metrics as to how well we are doing. It's a collaborative effort, either between the port and Alaska or concessionaires or other tenants, and that it's clearly understood, everybody recognizes what the impacts will be to their particular operation as well as the operation of the airports and to our customers. In the report, you'd also sort of asked about sort of friction points as we go along. We try to identify not necessarily friction points, but challenges or risks that the Port, Alaska, and our concessions will see, and we report those under each of the projects under the issues and risks. And it's really items that we feel are in front of us. They're something we know we can figure out an opportunity to work through and sort of develop and balance the scope of the project, the schedule, the budget, the availability of facility components to Alaska or concessions, and as well as sort of the operational impacts to minimize those as we work through those. So those are how we, in this report, will inform you as we go through each of the projects. And I just wanted to give some sort of hypothetical examples at this point. Some of them are fairly straightforward and standard that you may recognize. In terms of both by project and program progress, which typically would follow cash flow, budget schedule, contingency, actual versus forecast, kind of some of the standard things that we did for the rental car program. Then specific to sort of grouping North Satellite and Concourse C Vertical, which actually affect airline operations, aircraft, gate availability. Some concepts would be we'd identify the number of closures that changed from our phasing plan.
This slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just kept talking ahead. Yeah, so this would be sort of the measure, would be gate closures. And what we would report is our plan would be what would be in, as an example, the phasing for the North Satellite Project, which we currently have 2, 3, or 4 phased options. Each phasing option takes out a certain number of gates. A 2-phase would take out 6 or 7 gates during construction, whereas the 2, the 3, and the 4 phase would reduce the number of gates out by 5 or down to 3. And then as we progress, if we impact Alaska and we have to take say a 4th gate out that wasn't planned, we would report that as our metric in terms of perhaps a negative performance. If we give Alaska gates back sooner than we had planned, that would be a metric to report a positive. So these are sort of, again, hypotheticals. We think we can figure this out as we go and really have a good plan. The same would be go for Alaska or Horizon in terms of they typically measure a good performance as the number of turns per gate. In other words, the number of aircraft they can flip through and utilize. I think Alaska's goal or current measure is around 8 turns per gate, 6 to 8 turns depending on. So that'll be another measure that we'll try and keep track of. And again, the focus here is we only want to measure the impacts that the construction causes. There are other impacts that sometimes affect their turns. Off-gate parking, or that's sort of like RON, remain overnight. They'll park a plane off to the side. They can efficiently pull it in, board the craft, have it depart immediately after a plane that might be sitting at that gate does the same. The tow on and tow off is where they actually have to physically move a plane to put it somewhere else to allow another plane to come in. So these are all sort of Alaska-centric, airline-centric metrics. Then talk about concessions. Really 2 measures there, the available square feet that we plan to give them during construction or not. I mean, some could be completely shut down. And then the other is any impacts to the revenues. We will try to forecast what we think their income might be, the revenue, and then try and measure actuals. A little bit challenging here as we go through. On the refurbished baggage system, these are some examples. System shutdowns, delays, the system speed might be impacted by our project. The whole goal is to, keep them operational.
This looks great by me, and I know you were responding to kind of good questions here that were, how could we know how this is going? Have we developed these in collaboration with Alaska? Would we share? That's all I wanted to double check.
Yeah, and they actually have some others, Commissioner, that are sort of customer service focused. So we're still working through. That's why some of these are in their infancy and really want something that's meaningful and measurable, so that we're not challenged trying to report something that we're even challenged figuring out how we really did. Graphically, just as another hypothetical example of how we could present this information to you. We've talked about a red light, green light, kind of fun thing. Any further questions on this, I think?
Well, let me just commend you. This is exactly what I was hoping to see, and it just forces the alignment that we really fundamentally have, and I think Alaska Airlines and the other airline tenants and concessionaires all also recognize, and forces us to work on the construction side in a way that optimizes between construction and operational efficiencies, and to our concessionaires and tenants, a dollar's a dollar's a dollar. It doesn't matter if it came out on the construction side or it came out on the operating side. So thank you. This is a great job.
Oh, you're welcome. So I'll just quickly go through, hit some of the highlights. I talked about the phasing plan, 2, 3, and 4. We're working through that. I'll be upfront. Alaska feels 2 phases is the way to do the project, shorter construction duration. We're not sure we're there because of gate availability and where we can put them during the construction. There's work going on now. putting that information together and meeting with senior management of Alaska. And we've worked through all of the concepts. The team now has the conceptual drawings. We're evaluating those. We'll be making a recommendation to senior management, both with the port as well as at Alaska on the North Satellite. But there's a lot of work to do. We are wrapping up the International Air Transport Association level of service analysis. There's a program out there that analyzes hold rooms, concessions, walking space within the concourse to try and give it a B, C, D, or F rating for level of service, A being excellent, F not. And we want to apply this study to our concepts to see which one really affords us the best overall performance for the renovated North Satellite. One important point to the metrics I did want to touch on the Concourse C vertical. We're wrapping up towards 100%. They've probably conducted about 10 constructability meetings of various subjects with various people, particularly Horizon Alaska, to coordinate. Alaska has some tenant improvement work, the Horizon operations, port operations, as well as figuring out aircraft parking during construction and contractor access. So this is a good example of how we're going to put a plan together, create that baseline, and then measure our metrics of performance off of it. So pretty extensive work on this. And this one has actually caused a little bit of delay in getting out to bid. And the commission action will be coming forward here in October. Main terminal, nothing really to report. We're just starting slowly on that, trying to gauge how Alaska will become involved because they're also busy on the rest of the program. And then, as we've already received authorization, move forward with construction. And then this is, again, that perspective project. Alaska continues to evaluate rear aircraft deplaning. I actually experienced it on a flight back from Boston. I got out of the airport a half an hour quicker than I ever did before because of it, including picking up a checked bag. So I complimented them. They do have to tell their customers on the plane if that's going to happen, because some people put their bags up at the front of the plane, and it's a little hard when they're in the back to get off. So any other questions? Concludes my briefing.
Great job. Thank you very much.
Commissioners, the last briefing is on port liability insurance renewal for the policy year beginning October 1st, 2013, and Jeff Hollingsworth will be the presenter.
Jeff, I just want to assure you that this is the briefing we've all been waiting for.
Just chomping at the bits. I'm batting ninth, but that's fine. Which one do I click on here, Paul? Seeing this one? Yeah, this right here. All right, great. So good afternoon, Commissioners. Mr. Yoshitani. Today I will be updating you on where we are with the Ports Liability Insurance Program. In June, I briefed the Commission on our property insurance program, which we renewed on July 1. And it's both insurance programs run for 12 months. So this presentation will cover the insurance which will be bound prior to October 1st and will run for 1 year. So I'll be talking about, in brief, about the coverages, some of the premium factors, where we've been with our premium, the process that we go through, and highlight a couple of the renewal issues that we've been working on. So in terms of the coverage that we'll be renewing, this covers essentially all of our operations, and some of the insurance policies are very specific. For example, the airport general liability policy strictly applies to airport operations. But then we have other policies, some of the non-aviation, the employment practices, the public officials' policies that will apply across the board to employees of the port, no matter where they're located at. And up there I've got wrongful acts of employees, wrongful acts of port with respect to employees. The wrongful acts is a term defined in the insurance policy that essentially means errors and omissions. It means things that happen as a result of the course of what we do in our work, not in essence a intentionally wrong act of the port. Our auto coverage, it's labeled as auto liability, but it covers to all our fleet operations, our buses, the buses that we added last year for the rental car facility, our special purpose vehicles, all of our trucks, service vehicles throughout the port. The foreign coverage, that applies to any time we have individuals or groups that are traveling overseas, and protects our liability, including accidental sickness and medical while traveling in foreign countries. I have noted up there that we're not purchasing excess workers' compensation. On our workers' compensation, which is covers the indemnity and medical expenses to our own employees, that is in a separate program, which is self-insured, and we self-adjudicate that in accordance with the Washington RCWs. There was a point in time we purchased excess workers' compensation, but that has become very pricey, and we have elected at this time not to purchase that. So we are fully self-insured for that exposure. So the premium factors, and this is essentially what our underwriters look at as they come up with our renewal pricing and our rates that they want to apply to our policies. So they look, of course, at our overall operating budget, capital budget, expenses. And these are not all necessarily weighted equally. For example, past losses and claims, that gets weighted pretty heavily when they review, not only with the incumbent underwriters, but with new carriers that are looking to do business with the port. Our indemnity agreements with our tenants is very important because that shields us from direct liability from the operations of our tenants. It allows the tenants to deal with the liabilities that they create with the work they do for us, and our underwriters take that into account as they price our liability coverage. Likewise with our construction contracts, all our contractors that are working for us. They look at also and distinguish between the operations that we control directly versus though we have others do for us. So on the seaport side, we don't have any longshoremen. We don't do any of the direct stevedoring work. But, for example, on harbor services, we do run and operate our marinas. So there's a little difference in the way that gets evaluated. The size of our automobile fleet, our interlocal agreements, we have police and fire, various interlocal agreements with other jurisdictions. Our total number of employees, our payroll, I think I mentioned that. And then just where we are going with our employments, our containers at the seaport, and then our rail link. Those, I think I mentioned that later on. It's kind of a special operation, not long-term, but that is something that they look at. And then on the external side, the insurance markets in general, external events, especially with property insurance, when you have significant events like the flooding or other major property damage, there's always a lag effect between that actually starts affecting your rates. On the liability side, unfortunate events such as shootings and large spread food sicknesses and these other catastrophic liability events, there's also a little bit of a lag effect that can impact the pricing. And then the things that we can control is we select the deductible retentions that we want to buy the insurance at, and our limits, how much limits we want, the amount of limit we want for a certain type of coverage, and then special coverage. Do we want, for example, special cyber coverage, or do we want the terrorism type coverage? Those are the other things that we control and affect the pricing. So this graph just illustrates where we've been in terms with our overall revenue in terms of our total insurance premium. So these are all our policies combined And you can see that in the 2003, 2004, our rates took a dip between 2005, 2006, and that was mainly due to an adjustment we made by taking on some higher retentions. And then between 2008 and 9, when the economy went down, the insurance market, especially on the liability side, got softer, so that actually had an impact, and we were able to actually lower our retention deductibles and get lower pricing. And since 2010, we've been able to control our insurance cost. We've raised some of our retentions again, but doing that, we've been able to minimize our increase. Yet at the same time, you can see our overall revenue is growing. So that's the goal. We really try to shoot for 5 to 6 to 7% increases, no more than that type of an increase when we work with our underwriters on our liability insurance. So the process I mentioned, the policies will run for 1 year. And we do network with various trade groups, Airports Council International, other airport port entities to check to make sure that what we are buying in limits and what we're being offered is consistent with what others that have like operations are purchasing. And then the updating of operations claims litigation, that's just a process we work with our underwriters up in the markets prior to them giving us our pricing. And we do use an external broker to purchase our coverage. Some of our coverage is through admitted carriers in Washington, and then others are purchased through the surplus markets. And then our excess airport liability policy is actually a London purchased through London. So our broker, we use the one broker, but they have access to all the different markets. Then when we get the proposals and we feel that we have a good point, we will go to the divisions, budget and finance, and discuss where we are with the pricing, and if there's any additional coverages or coverages we're not buying, we'll discuss that with them to get their concurrence before we give our instructions to bind. And last year, our coverage was $781,000, and if you can read that, there's highlights where most of our retentions deductibles are at $1 million. Some of our smaller policies, we have lower deductibles. And then within that deductible retention, we handle in our department the claims that come up as a result of that. So the coverage issues for 2013-14. Some of these we discussed earlier and haven't changed that much from last year. For example, in the terrorism, we purchase that on the non-aviation side. We don't purchase that on the aviation side. And then the airport limits, we raised them 2 years ago to $500 million from $300 million. We're going to keep that at $500 million. And one of the things we looked at this year was a policy for the marine general liability, which would bridge the gap between our retention and a lower deductible. But when we compared our actual losses that we've had in that area, it just didn't pan out with the coverage. So our recommendation is not to purchase that drop-down coverage and stay where we've been. I did mention the excess workers' compensation. And then on the cyber liability coverage, this is a growing area in terms of liability insurance coverage, and it's mainly evolved out of the exclusions that a lot of our traditional liability policies have inserted regarding network coverage, damage to your infrastructure, third-party liabilities that arise out of your networks, data breach. There's a whole if you have a web page, websites, copyright infringement, there are all these exposures that come out of with what they call cyber, and they've been excluded out of these other policies. And now there's these standalone policies that are coming up, but there's still a lot of questions. Again, there's not a lot of markets that write that, so we've kind of approached that slowly with our brokers and had some discussions with our ICT folks about whether we think it's worthwhile to pursue this. So that is a work in progress still on making a determination if we want to buy the cyber coverage. In terms of operational issues, we do cover our exposures along the East Side Rail Corridor, and that would luckily there's not a lot of rail volume on there, so it's mainly the liability that we have just for the fact that we're owners of it, and it can be an attractive nuisance, and there's crossings with traffic and homeowners that live on either sides of that. So we have coverage for that. We have the east marginal weight grade separation that project's been completed, but we have the maintenance of that, whether it's street sweeping or snow cleaning. So there's a liability with that. That's crazy. We have that currently.
We have the maintenance on the east marginal weight grade separation?
Until we can turn it over to the city.
Oh, okay, but not in perpetuity.
Right. Right. And once we get the MOU and make that transfer, then that would go away. But it's a temporary exposure we have. And then last year when we opened up the rental car facility busing operations, that was kind of we added 20 buses or so. We added 65 drivers, which all fall into the commercial driver license program. And we felt pretty good with the drivers we hired in the operations, and it's been very successful in terms of we've had very little liability issues or driving incidents out of the RCF. It's been a real highlight, actually, and was not even much of a concern for our underwriters. They're very happy with our first year of operation. That loss claims have been almost minimal. So we're looking at roughly, last year we were at 781,000 and looking at probably $805,000 to $810,000 for the renewal this year. So it'll be on the lower end of the range. I don't know if there's anybody has any questions.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Any questions? I think you covered the topic quite well. Hey, any other business?
Actually, I just have one question, Jeff.
Oh.
The RCF, that's coming out of the CFCs, right?
Right. We have a line item. Yes.
Yeah. We have no other items.
Very good. Commissioners, any other business? Any new business? Hearing none, we are hereby adjourned. 4:05.